Okay, it's 4 o'clock. Today is Wednesday, April 22nd, and I will call to order the special meeting of the Salina City Commission. First, I will ask staff if the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been provided.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, we will do roll call.
Mayor Hoppick.
Here.
Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Franz.
Here.
Commissioner Hodges. Here. Commissioner Ryan.
Here. Okay, Mayor Hoppick here. Before we get started and do the Pledge of Allegiance, I'm going to ask City Manager Mike Scragg to kind of go over the way this is going to work today with the different media connections. So, thank you.
Mayor Hoppick. This same format as in the past. For those listening at home, what we have is what we call a conference bridge or a conference phone call that can accommodate, I believe, up to 150 callers. And so anyone that wishes to address the City Commission would have the opportunity to do so by calling into that conference call. I'll give the number now, and then I'll give it in a little bit if someone has to run and get a paper and pencil. But the call-in number is 785-621-0800, and then the caller will be prompted for a participant ID, and that number is 782-956. And then they'll be prompted to give their name. They don't necessarily have to give their name, but they do need to hit the pound sign and to move past that step, and then they'll be in the call. That will allow them to hear the conversation that's going on here over our phone, and then it will give them the opportunity to indicate when called upon for public comment. If they wish to speak to the City Commission, they would press *9 on their phone. That shows up on the laptop computer that I'm monitoring and lets me know that they've indicated they wish to participate in public comment, and we'll have the opportunity to unmute their call on them, and you'll be able to hear them over the speakerphone. We don't have executive session scheduled on today's agenda, but just as a matter of procedure, the way we handle that is if we go into executive session, the conference call stays live. Our audio is muted. The Salina Media Connection feed it continues like it does in any other instance where we have an executive session with no audio and a visual message that we're in executive session. Same thing with YouTube Live. And then as we come back out of executive session at the specified time, we'll unmute the phone, unmute the audio feed from Salina Media Connection and YouTube Live, and pick up the meeting from there. So, with that, I'll repeat the call-in number, and all this information is posted publicly as we post our agendas, and it's actually on the agenda. But I'll repeat the call-in number again. It's 785-621-0800, and the participant ID number is 782-956. And then the last thing I need to do is confirm with Scott Gardner, a staff person, that all of our technology is working. So first thing I need to do is be sure to unmute him so he can answer. Scott, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Is the YouTube Live feed up and running?
Yes, it is.
Is the Salina Media Connections cable feed up and running?
Yes, it is.
And is the Salina Media Connection online version up and running?
Yes, it is.
All right. So I believe Salina Media Connection also has a YouTube Live feed going today, but in terms of what we announced publicly is those three items: the cable feed, the online feed, and the city's YouTube Live feed. So everything's working, and that completes my housekeeping.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. With that, I would ask all those that are able to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we will move into administration. I will have everyone make a note that we do have under administration an item 3.2, and that will be dealing with the resolution number 20-7830, which will be approving the city manager's recommendations for staffing. So we'll be dealing with that after 3.1. So with that.
Excuse me, Okay, there it is. I just found it on my email. I did not have the resolution in front of me. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, Andy, we'll move into 3.1.
Item 3.1, discuss budget-related personnel matters.
Okay, before I turn it over to City Manager Mike Scragg, I just want everyone to know that this is the part of our job that none of us look forward to, that none of us foresaw the COVID-19, and this is something that I do believe we have to address, obviously, with our budget issues, and I want to give staff a lot of thank yous for the time they've spent putting this information together. I know not only taking into consideration the budget, but also those employees that we're dealing with that we will be affecting their lives, and so I thank you for that, and with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Franz and Mayor Hoppick, if I might.
Yes.
I have a concern about the staffing information provided to us by the city manager in an email entitled COVID-19 Staffing Proposal Detailed earlier today. I appreciate the detailed information, and I do not believe it rises to the level of executive session privilege. I strongly believe the City Commission discussion of the detailed proposal at that level of detail is imprudent for two reasons. First, none of us individually or collectively has enough information about the day-to-day operation of each department to make those decisions. We are here to set policy, not to implement day-to-day operational decisions or schedule staff or anything like that. Second, I believe it's beyond our authority as city commissioners granted in City Code Section 2.23, paragraphs 4 and 5, and is an encroachment on the city manager's duties and authority provided in Section 2.38, paragraph 4. Moving forward with the discussion of the detailed tables distributed earlier today, I believe violates our ethics policy, which states in part, never intentionally act outside the scope of authority prescribed by one's duties. I move that we limit discussion to the departmental level summaries provided on pages 38 and 39 of the PowerPoint presentations, or similar summaries that were distributed to us last Monday.
Okay. And then that was in a motion.
That's a motion.
Okay. Do we have a second to that motion?
Commissioner Davis, I'll second it so we can certainly at least have discussion.
Okay.
Just so I can
Okay.
digest everything here.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion.
Commissioner Haas is here. I don't know if that was directed at my request to have more information about the positions that we're discussing, hourly reductions and furloughs, but I could not disagree with Commissioner Franz more, because I believe it's incumbent upon us when we are facing some of the most major and life-altering decisions that we have for our best asset, which is our employees, that we don't spend some degree of examination in terms of what positions. I don't really know if it's germane to discuss, like go down and talk about, well, is an administrative clerk worth more than a public works worker? I don't think so, but I think that in order to have the information that I felt that I needed to have, I need to see the people who are being affected and be able to take that into consideration as well. And I feel like that's a part of our duty.
Commissioner Davis, is there a point in the presentation at which we would be better suited to address the motion? And I just want to make sure I have my head wrapped around it correctly. Commissioner Franz, you want to not go specifically into each position?
That's
today?
correct. I think we should need to limit our discussion to department-wide discussions and the overall effects on that department. I just don't think we know enough to talk about whether this account clerk should be 40% and this one 20% and this firefighter, on furlough and that police officer full-time. We don't have that information.
Okay, now,
and we could talk about it for hours today and still wouldn't have that information.
as I understood from reading the front part of this, and Mr. Scrape, please correct me if I'm wrong, the department heads did that person by person, I mean, true elbow grease work to help construct this information. I mean, that work's been done by the department head, who I'm assuming would have intimate knowledge of each employee's.
If I may kind of explain the process, we had conversation early last week explaining work share, explaining furlough, what those things, what the details of those were. We prepared a spreadsheet and asked each department head to look at all their employees and respond back by completing that spreadsheet in terms of staff levels that could be at the 20% work share, 40% work share, and furlough. We then, the finance director, HR director, and myself reviewed those, and then we met with each department head Thursday and Friday of last week. We kind of finalized our understanding of what the department heads had provided, and as well as discussed details. We spent the weekend then going over what implementation of that might look like, and what I would tell you is we looked at that proposed staffing level and worked that through in terms of cost savings and including benefits and capers, contributions, those type of things, and ended up at the number that we're reporting to you today in terms of savings. It wasn't necessary for us to kind of go in and make a second pass beyond what we were able to discuss with the department heads. And I do want to give the department heads credit, either at the initial outset or as we had our follow-up conversation about kind of the significance of what we're trying to accomplish. Every one of them stepped up in terms of understanding the gravity of the gap we're trying to fill, the significance of it. One thing that I did stress to them is hopefully we're solving the worst case scenario. As you know, we looked at a 30-day, 60-day, and 90-day scenario. So I'm a little bit hopeful that if things play out well, we can dial back a little bit. But they were very responsive to the request. What I would tell you is I don't think any of them are comfortable that this is going to be a walk in the park. They all offered up things that are difficult on an individual employee basis and on a operational service level basis, recognizing the challenge that was before us. So that's a long answer to yes, this was the result of collaboration with department heads, but understandably, department heads have expressed concern, continue to express concern about as more details come up, we're just going to have to kind of adapt in terms of service challenges, staffing challenges, what we're up against.
To Commissioner Franz, are you envisioning that we would become knowledgeable enough about each individual employee position to make that decision, or we should stay out of that completely?
I'm envisioning that we will not become knowledgeable about that, and we should stay out of that level of discussion and decision making. I don't mind talking about a department and saying, could this be done a little bit differently? We think this is less important or more important. But at the individual level, I have some real concerns about us trying to make those judgments and second guess the department heads who work with these people every day and they know what they do every day, and the city manager who oversees all of that every day. And I would further note, even though I said I don't think this rises to the level of executive privilege, and perhaps Mr. Bankston can correct me, there are still quite a number of positions here that have one person in them. And it's going to be pretty easy to figure out who it is that we're talking about in those cases. But again, I don't know if that kicks it to that level or not. I will defer to the legal counsel on that. But I have issues about doing this. I think it goes beyond what we're charged with doing.
I guess procedure, do we then cross into and this Commissioner Davis' question for the city attorney, do we then cross into personnel matters as it relates to an individual employee, certainly in the situation where there's a one-person department or subdivision of a department, where that person's identity is easily unmasked.
Yes, Greg Bingston, legal counsel. There are two levels of analysis at issue, I believe, and Commissioner Franz has spoken to both of them. You do have the matter of the respective roles of the governing body relative to the city manager, and then you do have the matter of the interest that is at issue on the potential need for or qualification for an executive session discussion is based upon the privacy interests of the employee. That's what prompts, when you get to the level of an individual employee or readily identifiable members of a class of employees, you are in that area where their right to privacy can be violated by a public discussion of matters that they would deem of their private interest.
Closer to a yes. So she may have the question.
With a discussion of this gravity, I'm just not comfortable taking anything off the table at this point. And if we need to get into a point where we need to go into executive session to protect a worker's privacy, I totally respect that, and I would want to do that. But I'm not willing to limit our discussion at this point because I think it breaches our duty of oversight. So that's where I'm coming from.
Commissioner Ryan here. I agree with Mr. Franz. I think that this is all within the duties of the city manager. On the other hand, I appreciate the level of detail that's been gone into and the attempt to educate us, but I think it's purely within his job description to carry out the plan that he's presenting. For me personally, I just wanted to be satisfied that all of our staff were being considered individually and their family situations. And what I'm hearing is saying to me that we across the board supported all of our people and their needs individually, and that's what I was looking for. I think the city manager has the discretion, and we're a little bit out of bounds to be going into the details as much as we possibly could with this information.
Commissioner Davis, normally we do entrust the entire body of employees to the city manager. And certainly if a position had to be reclassified or job hours cut down for lack of demand, it would never reach our level of review. Does an action of this magnitude affecting essentially all of our employees potentially rise to the level where the city manager needs approval of a plan? I don't know whether you're asking us more to approve each individual detail or to approve the way in which the plan is going to be carried out. And I don't know if that distinction would be similar to the division of what we discussed that Commissioner Franz mentioned.
Mike's Craig, if I may, in terms of the resolution, it refers to the plan, but it also identifies or acknowledges the fact that there's a lot of changing variables and the need for some discretion as the economy changes. As we start to implement this, I fully expect we're going to run into unforeseen scheduling issues, just functional issues that create overtime, unexpected overtime, create a schedule that doesn't work with a work share for a particular position. And at a minimum, as the city manager and as department heads, we're going to need flexibility rather than come back position by position week after week. But the resolution is brought to you as an opportunity for you as the governing body, rather than just hear from me what I've done, to hear the report I plan to provide and indicate your consent with it.
Certainly, as far as
Commissioner Hopkins, if I understand the motion correctly, and perhaps Commissioner France could confirm that, if we have a staffing concern or question within the structure of a certain department, and that conversation is totally off the table. Do I understand that correctly?
I think if we have a question about the way a department is configured, we can ask questions about that. But I want to stay away from discussions that involve individual positions.
Well, yeah, I don't see myself calling out like a master HVAC technician, because obviously everyone knows about that. But when we are talking about staffing of public safety departments, we need to be able to take a look at what's being proposed to make sure that we are understanding the ramifications of our decisions, because every decision that we make obviously is going to have a ripple effect in terms of the services and the safety of our community. So that is my objection to not being able to address how effectively we either are going to perform or are not going to perform by having certain staff members' hours reduced or having them furloughed.
Commissioner Davis, I may have a follow-up question which may help make it easier to answer that concern. Just as an example, because it's probably a fairly obvious example, if we as a body disagreed with a planned reduction, and I'm just going to pick on the fire department just because they're visible, and we said no, our priority is the fire department stay whole. If we have to go into fund balance to pay them, that's what we want to do. Would we be removing ourselves from the ability to make that decision or that discussion
we would
under
not.
your plan?
I have no problem with talking about individual departments and the proposal that is in those summary tables, but I don't want to go into discussing specific positions in those departments, because even in critical departments we do some non-critical stuff. I mean, we do stuff that, while it's good that we do it and it's advantageous, provides a better service, we can probably live without for 30, 60, 90 days. So we can make adjustments to those sorts of things. I don't think any of us have the knowledge to make those choices, whereas the department heads who've been through this do have that knowledge, and I think they've made that choice, and we need to extend them a certain amount of respect and acknowledge that they really do know what they can live with. I don't know how else I can say it.
I understand what you. I just hadn't thought it through on that level before the meeting.
Mayor Hoppick here.
Is there a place in here where your good zone for discussion ends and there's a place that you don't want to go begins?
I see nothing in the original PowerPoint presentation. The only issue I have is with the table that was distributed earlier today. And like I said, I appreciate having that information, and it does give me some a degree of comfort that they've gone through their duties. I just don't want to get into the process of discussing each individual position or several individual positions, whatever department they're in, unless we're ready to play the role of five little city managers and have a line of 450 employees waiting to see us saying, no, wait a minute, I'm worth more than that, because every one of them is. That's the problem. Every one of our employees is worth keeping full-time. They do good service, they provide good service to the public, and this is going to hurt. It's going to hurt us, it's going to hurt members of the public who are going to be impacted by service cuts. I don't have enough knowledge about what they do to be able to make those calls. And what do we do if each of the five of us has a different call on that position? And I'm sure there are positions that we will disagree with. So my point is, I think we need to keep the conversation generic, talk about the departmental allocations, and move forward with that instead of trying to get into detail.
Mayor Hoppick here. Thank you, Commissioner Franz, and I agree. I think what we received today as a breakout on each department was very helpful in the fact that it did show that they had done their due diligence. And but I think you're exactly right. If we sit up here and we try to manage this, we're really to govern. But if we try to manage this, we could come up with 5 different scenarios of what we think a department should do. Not that all 5 of us would be wrong, or all 5 of us would be right, but we'd have different of opinion. I myself have got to trust the professionals, and that's the department heads, HR department, and the city manager, and legal counsel, that they have done what they think is best for the community here as far as keeping us safe, doing the services we need to, knowing that some services will not meet the standards we're used to. And we apologize for that. But I have to have faith in those individuals that they know their department better than I do. It would be no different than me going into Commissioner Ryan's facility and trying to tell him who he needs to keep and to furlough and who he needs to go 20 or 40% when I don't know his business. And so I think we need to proceed with the original report presented to us by the staff, and we can talk about different departments if we need to, but as far as getting into the weeds on it, I don't believe that's our job, nor is it our expertise to do.
So, this Commissioner Davis, are we saying there will be a hands-off policy forever and a day with regard to this? I mean, do you envision situations where we want to bend that policy back?
And I will look to Mr. Scragg for that, because, as again, this is a fluid situation. We don't know when the stay-at-home is going to come off. We don't know when the what's going to happen. How do we proceed? And I think this is your question. How do we proceed from this as things change? Does it have to come back to the commission, or does this resolution give you the authority to bring people back as needed?
But the resolution tries to state the intent of this plan and what we're trying to accomplish, and so there could be a number of things on a daily basis. I expect we're going to have things come up that department heads are going to have to deal with. I mean, we've already had conversations with department heads that if we're trying to accomplish a 20% work share with a particular set of employees, but something comes up and they end up having to work more than that 32 hours, then we're going to have to adapt to that for that work week for the purposes of work share and have them work a full 40 so they can draw a full paycheck. So day to day, I expect this is going to evolve, and the resolution's intended to grant us that level of authority. I'm hopeful that as more information becomes available and as we get further into this, maybe our worst case scenario is not what we thought it was. I fully expect we're going to be providing you with additional financial reports about revised projections, which then shed some light on our ability to revise this plan. The other thing I would tell you is the resolution's intended to kind of state the intent of what we're trying to accomplish, and to the best of our ability, we have tried to take into account each individual employee's pay rate and what I refer to as a break even. And it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be down to the penny. We don't even know all the circumstances of employees and outside employment, those type of things. But if it starts to financially, if it starts to look like we're not able to meet the intent of that plan, I fully intend to be back to you and advise you that it's not working as we intended and we need to adapt. I don't see that as something that I would implement or staff would implement and then we would just advise you. But if we can administer the plan, adapting on a day-to-day basis, and we can actually accomplish what we're trying to accomplish in terms of being mindful of employees breaking even thanks to the work share program and the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, we're going to have to be pretty light on our feet as circumstances present themselves. And when I say we, I'm envisioning that's me as the city manager and the department heads.
Commissioner Davis, if the viral pandemic was not an issue, with all those special circumstances, and we just had a low-income year, would it be in your authority to make similar changes to our employees' work schedules and job sharing, et cetera, anyway?
I believe the way the code is written and the way the personnel manual is written, yes. Now, I will be the first to acknowledge the significance of this is well beyond an individual personnel hearing or decision or a budget, a less significant budget adjustment. But, some of the information we provided you previously about reductions in force and layoffs and authority generally presumes if it's budget neutral or represents a savings, it's within the city manager's authority. To exceed the estimated cost of the pay plan is not within the city manager's authority. But I would welcome the city attorney's elaboration on that.
Greg Binkson, legal counsel, if it is helpful, there in section I of the recitals in the resolution, there is a recitation of what appeared to me to be the relevant responsibilities of the city manager. And that is followed in recital J with what appeared to me to be a recital of the relevant roles of the governing body as articulated in our code. So rather than reading those to you, I think that is hopefully the way the two are juxtaposed. And certainly there is a high level under the city manager plan of the administrative role of the manager. There is, under our code, the governing body is looked to, well, if I may, determine after consideration of the recommendation of the city manager, the organization of the city and such departments and offices are necessary to carry out the business of the city under the commission manager form of government, and determine after consideration of the recommendation of the city manager the city's plan for compensating its employees. In the normal course, as you know, you all are experienced and familiar with how that process normally occurs in terms of the pay plan and such. I think it's fair to say the city manager recognized that we did have a unique circumstance. Little did we know that we would have to call upon virtually all of the responsibilities of the city manager under the both statute and the code. In this particular case, it pretty well calls upon all of them as it relates to structure, staffing, the budget, advising the governing body the financial condition and needs of the city, and making recommendations on all matters concerning the welfare of the city. I don't know of any other circumstance where we've had such a concentration of those sorts of responsibilities than we're facing right now. So I think the thought was to, as I would understand Mr. Scragg's intent, was to look at a plan that does give considerable latitude, refers specifically to broad discretion, but to be sure that at the outset that was a plan that made sense to you all.
Commissioner Davis, so you would need really more than just our being brought up to speed with what your plan is, but in fact tacit approval of the plan because of the wide sweeping changes. And I'm just going to ask Commissioner Hodges if it would be worthwhile, would you have additional information to make a decision if we delayed voting on the motion that's on the floor now until we get to page 50, I guess it is?
I'm sorry. Sometimes, Commissioner Hodges here. I'm sorry, Dr. Davis. Sometimes, for whatever reason, your mic cuts out occasionally, so I'm sorry if I interrupted, but I didn't catch your question.
Oh, I was just asking if you would have more information or a greater degree of comfort in voting on the motion on the floor if we delayed the vote until we went through the presentation, I don't know, all 50 pages or page 38 pages, and then decided if we wanted to go into the weeds or not.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Davis. Commissioner Hodges here. I think that what we're talking about, and I get where Commissioner France is coming from, and I respect what Mr. Bankston just read to us from the resolution itself, but I think what we're talking about is different philosophies, different interpretations of what our role as governing body members is. And I think that, you know, obviously, I think that our duty for oversight, and as Mr. Bankston just read, between, you know, with items I and J, sometimes those, the city manager responsibilities and the governing body responsibilities are going to collide. And with an item of this magnitude, I don't want to feel like I'm hamstrung if I have a specific question regarding staffing in a department and what that effect is going to be on our services, on our operations. And so if you want to go ahead and call the question to me, I think that's the thing to do. Because, and golly, I hope we aren't going to get to have all 50 slides read to us today, but I think that delaying it for another hour while that happens isn't probably going to advance the conversation anymore. I think we're talking about two different philosophies. I view it as part of my job, part of the responsibilities of being a member of the governing body, and I think that I'm probably in the minority. I think that other members of the governing body see it as the city manager's purview to do this management, and I understand that. But I guess my question back to the governing body would be, why are we here? I mean, unless we're amending the budget, what are we doing here? I mean, if Mr. Scragg is just going to exercise his judgment and implement this plan, I just don't understand why we're here.
Commissioner Ryan here. I guess that I feel I'd like to hear what the staff wants to present, and then I'd hope we could vote on this up or down. I do feel that this is the city manager's responsibility, and if I were in his position, I would want to be as transparent with us as possible. Just put it all out on the table, so I'm sure that the public will appreciate having that before them, and we should take it all in. But from my point of view, it's his responsibility to carry out the plan that he sees as best fit for the Salina municipality.
Commissioner Davis, to Commissioner France, is there anything, or even to our city manager, that we would give up? I don't have an example, by limiting our discussion to just the broad departmental discussion.
Commissioner Franz, I don't see anything we would give up, and you know, I do agree with Commissioner Hodges on one thing. It is a matter of philosophy as to what our role is, but that is also called out specifically in code, and part of it is referred to in the resolution. And in my view, we're here to make policy. You know, I didn't run for election to be a little city manager. I don't think any of you did either. And so we need to exercise our oversight of him. That means an overview of the plan and a certain amount of trust that the department heads went through this and he's gone through this, and this is a workable plan, possibly, as he noted, with some on-the-fly adjustments that might need to be made as we learn more. I just don't see discussion of individual positions within departments as part of our purview. You know, if the fire chief says he can get by with what he's proposed, I'm going to accept that. Even though I might disagree with it, I'm not the fire chief.
Now, were we going to be asked to review these charts and make adjustments, or just review them to say that we've seen them? And
Well, these charts are which charts?
I'm sorry, the ones that we were given today with the position listing by
The
department.
detail listing?
Detail listing.
I think it's certainly helpful to know that, and if I had a specific concern about one of those, I would probably call the city manager and ask, did you consider this? I did not. I didn't call him and ask him. You know, I think our discussion, again, should be limited to those department-wide adjustments, and we can say, can you do a little bit more here? Can we do a little bit less here, if that's what we want to do? And then we can vote on that, and 3 votes carry the day. But I don't want to get into saying, I think you should have adjusted this position more and this position less.
Mayor Hoppick here. I was a little taken back by the question of why are we here. I think it's pretty obvious that this is a serious matter. I think the information that's given, that we're also sharing with the community, shows us that staff has put exceeding amount of time into this. It talks about where we are anticipating our shortfalls being in our budget. It talks about how we're trying to close that gap some. I think it's fairly obvious why we're here, is to let the community know where we're headed, not only the employees but the community, and we do that in an open meeting, and that's why we're here. So we have a motion and a second. I don't know, did anybody call the...
I'd call a question.
Oh, second, if we're going to vote on the...
I think Commissioner Davis already seconded.
Yeah, we have
no, that was...
calling of the question.
For the calling of the question.
Question, yes.
That I didn't second.
Okay, sorry.
I wanted to ask one more question, but unless you were going to second it. But so in our discussion, in our discussion, department by department, if we have concerns about could this department get more, do with less, this would be the time to indirectly discuss individual positions.
I think we can ask that and say, can you explain why this is all this department did? Can you explain why this department, did as much as they did, or thinks they can do as much as they did, if we have those concerns? Sure.
Okay.
Okay, we had...
I will second your call.
Second call, okay. And do you want to reread the motion?
Well, this is just to call the question, technically.
Okay.
I think.
Oh, we got to vote on the call, okay.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. Greg Bankston, legal counsel. Calling the question from a parliamentary standpoint does trigger a 2/3 majority requirement. I don't want to unduly interfere, but if everyone has said all they wish to say and the mayor wishes simply to move to a vote, that may be the more expedited process for you at this point in the conversation. That's up to the chair.
Okay. That's where I was trying to head.
Okay.
So do we need to remove the...
I don't recall who called the question.
I'll retract my calling the question.
Okay. We have a retraction of the call, so we're, Sandy, could you read the motion? Do you have that?
I have to limit the discussion to departmental summaries distributed last Monday.
To limit the discussion to the staffing plan that was handed out originally and dealing with departments individually.
Just for clarification, that would be the one that's titled on the screen.
Yes.
Yeah, I believe I said that, that those were that were on pages 38 and 39 of the PowerPoint presentation, or similar sorts of presentations.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Yay. Okay. That passes 4-1. Okay, with that, we will move into 3.1.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. you made some points I intended to start with, and that is out of the interest of transparency and out of recognition of the significance of what we're facing, we've tried to prepare a presentation for you today that's not just picking up where your conversation has left off. I drafted it with a broader intended audience in mind. We have citizens at large that are trying to pay attention to what we're doing and what our service levels might look like, and we certainly have employees that this is a heightened interest to them. I would tell you that I think this is the 10th presentation we've prepared and presented in 6.5 weeks on finances and staffing. It's all kind of been a progression of conversation and direction from you as the governing body, and it culminates in your most recent direction, and that was look at staffing to try to close that financial gap that we previously identified, which is roughly $2.1 million left after we tried to tackle anything other than personnel. So with that, a couple of other things I wanted to cover in terms of our overall approach. We are a $100 million plus organization as a budget, and I make that point to stress the size of the organization. Not that it's easy to say, well, $2 million out of $100 million, how hard can it be? Well, the $2 million is what's left after we've already gone through all the other cutting that we could to close a broader gap. And our biggest problem is in the general fund, and it's not the full $100 million. And it, as you know, 73% or so of that budget is personnel, and we've tried to do it without impacting personnel to this point. We have 485 plus employees, and it would be awful easy to make some broad brush determinations and move on. We did not do that. We looked at every single employee and position and their pay rates and the impact of what I'm going to propose to you as it relates to them individually. So individual consideration was given by department heads, myself as the city manager, the finance director, and the human resources director. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm working off paper rather than advancing the slide. So the financial model that we conducted was at the employee level, and every effort was made to minimize financial impacts. And we're going to talk quite a bit about break even, and I definitely need to give you qualify that we had to make a lot of we had to learn about how a number of programs might be applied, had to make a lot of calculations. So I feel pretty comfortable that we have got a very good model, a good understanding, and a good calculation, but it won't be down to the dollar or the penny. But it's our best effort to get to a point where employees possibly can break even. That means that we have customized lengths of furloughs and work shares depending on each individual employee's circumstance. At the point that they stop breaking even, we assume that we bring them back in a full capacity. And so all the numbers that we've calculated and the plan that we are proposing is customized to that level of detail. I won't go over everything in the next slide, but I did want to cover for your benefit as well as possibly the employees' benefit, what do we know right now? And unfortunately, it's not as much as we'd like to know, but this is essentially is a summary of the timeline of what's transpired that's impacted our finances. And so the big takeaways there are we had two mass gathering limits. First it went to 50, then it went to 10. Those took place in March, and then early April we had both the county level safer at home order, and that was March 27th, and then the governor's executive order for a stay-at-home order. Obviously, those are what are driving our financial projections and our financial difficulties at this point. I would tell you, I didn't have an opportunity to watch the governor's press conference today, but my understanding is she made some comments about being aware of and following the progression that the president has proposed in terms of seeing declines in positive numbers for 14 days and then having kind of a phased-in approach. My understanding is her observation was we've yet to see declines, and so that 14-day clock theoretically hasn't even started to run yet. So if we take 14 days from today, that gets us beyond the May 3rd stay-at-home order that's currently in effect. I'm speculating, but starting to look like the stay-at-home order may extend beyond May 3rd, but haven't heard anything officially. The information on the screen is the most recent information I could find about cases in Kansas, total cases and new cases, and it's relatively. It hasn't gone exponential, at least, but it's still something to monitor. I also provided to you a county map just to give you a sense of how things are playing out through the state and how Salina County compares. And then lastly, as it relates to this information, provided you an update. I'm a little skeptical of Wikipedia, but that was the best source I could find of confirmed cases and deaths in Salina County at the state level, at the United States level, and at the worldwide level. So I think what's important is what have we observed, and as I have conversations with staff and citizens, I'm not sure it's self-evident what we've observed and why we've been having the conversations we have about finances. Just the mass gathering limitations alone, that seems so long ago, and we've been so focused on the stay-at-home order, but when the mass gathering limitations went in on March 16th, we immediately saw changes in spending patterns and particular restaurant and retail behavior. And so we at that point expected that there would be some financial impact to our March sales tax proceeds and our revenues. Then the stay-at-home order kicked in, and that undoubtedly has significantly limited local activity and spending, and that's still in effect. And if you're reading locally or nationally, there's just a lot of conversation, a lot of uncertainty about the impacts of that. And you've heard me say, I don't know how many times now, sales tax is 2 months in arrears, so we really won't know what the April stay-at-home order did to our sales tax proceeds until essentially the beginning of July. I'm hopeful that that is a point where we'll have another conversation about here's what we know about our finances now, here's how that compares to our revenue forecasting that we did, and here's the adjustments that we think we can make at that point. But we're getting snippets of information, basically anecdotal information, that I don't feel comfortable relying on, and we really won't have a whole lot until the 1st of July. The anecdotes that we are coming across are at least somewhere in the range of some of the forecasting we did. So I'm a little encouraged that while we may have felt like we were being overly conservative, the information that's starting to come in is at least kind of synchronizing with the forecasting that we did. Having said that, that's about 3 pieces of information. It's not anywhere near the level of detail that we really need to revise our forecast. So the other things that we know, and we've talked about this at great length, is unemployment filings are just unprecedented. The state's overwhelmed in terms of their calling system and their database. And then we've spent a lot of time trying to become familiar with some of the supplement programs, the federal pandemic unemployment compensation and how that's going to work, as well as the state's work share program. And what we've learned is that $600 a week on the pandemic pay, and the state has indicated they expect to be able to implement that and issue those payments in the next week or two, which would be this week or next, based on the timing when they made that statement, and that they would make them retroactively for people that qualified. So the sooner we get our employees qualified, whether there's a delay in the state's ability to administer it or not, the sooner they at least qualify for retroactive payment. We also know that Kansas was the first state to close schools for the remainder of the academic year. I don't know if that indicates that Governor Kelly's conservative and is an indicator of how she might proceed on stay-at-home orders, but we were conservative in that regard. And then they're trying to pay attention to what other communities and states are doing. There's more than a dozen states that have extended their stay-at-home orders into May. Virginia has stated June 10th. There's a number of them that have an unspecified date. They'll just take it under advisement. And I believe it was last week that the mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, extended their stay-at-home order to May 15th. So we're seeing, we talked about it. Is it going to be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? We're seeing plenty of examples beyond what would be 30 days for us. And then we're seeing other communities that have begun budget adjustments, budget cuts, furloughs, park and rec programming cancellations. Not a lot of them. I think we remain kind of on the front edge of trying to get a handle on this, but we're seeing examples from our peer communities in the state. Have some unemployment data there. The point, which I think everyone already knows, is unprecedented levels of filings. I keep seeing references to 4 stimulus bills, and I have had a little trouble making sense of those 4. As I understand it, there was one that really probably didn't get our attention, and that was the Preparedness Response and Supplemental Appropriations Act. That was directed more at emergency funding for federal agencies. Then the one that we spent a lot of time talking about, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and the provisions there. The 2 that are of interest to municipal governments are the emergency paid sick leave and the emergency family medical leave. And as you well know, as a municipal government, we are excluded from, we have to observe the emergency paid leave and the emergency family medical leave, but we're excluded from the reimbursement that a private employer would receive. I would tell you that, when it came time to implement the stay-at-home order, some of the thought process that I went through was, number one, I did not want to just blanket say that we're a government and we're essential and all of our employees come to work from just a safety standpoint for our employees. Secondly, I do know there are quite a few communities that have said, well, if we're going to be paying them leave one way or the other, let's have them work from home in whatever capacity they can. I've heard of employees being told just to read things about what you work on the internet and call it good. I intentionally wanted to make use of the leave in part so we didn't have to manage what people were doing at home, but more importantly, holding out a little bit of hope that maybe the legislation would get changed, we would become eligible for that reimbursement. And now as we've run the numbers, if we get lucky enough to have that come through, that might close the remaining gap that we have identified. So it at least keeps our options open in terms of eligibility if that should break our way. And then the third stimulus bill is what's being referred to as the CARES Act. That's kind of been the most recent conversation, and now CARES 2, which I believe the Senate approved, and it's going to the House, would be the 4th bill. So I don't know. The big thing out of the CARES Act is that $600 a week of unemployment supplement, the 13-week extension to unemployment, and the $1,200 stimulus checks. Those all kind of factor into the impacts on our employees and their finances. CARES 2, there seems to have been some discussion about extending that $600 a week of unemployment supplement. Don't really know how that might play out. And from what I've been able to see, there was conversation about aid to local governments, and that was put off. It was everything from Secretary Mnuchin to Congress has said they'll take that up in, I guess, a 5th stimulus bill if they do. So the other thing I think I've shared with you before is what we are seeing in terms of the aid that is being made available is it is targeted at coronavirus response costs. It's not intended, it's very intentionally excludes cost recovery for lost revenue. And that continues to it seems to continue to be a theme. I am seeing some conversation about it should be broader than that. Haven't seen a lot of movement in Congress on that regard. So what do we not know? We don't know the duration of the stay-at-home orders. We don't know whether we're going to have a recurrence. We don't know the likelihood of mass gathering limitations being extended beyond a stay-at-home order. We don't know the duration of any additional mass gatherings. A lot of conversation about whether this will come in waves in terms of COVID-19 exposures causing additional impacts out in the future. I'm very concerned about the extent and duration of lingering unemployment and what impact it might have on our economy and our budget, as well as are we going to see alteration of social spending and spending patterns that, when we feel like we're back to our new normal's less than what we have budgeted for in the past. Small and large business closures, we seen some numbers there, and that obviously impacts our budget as well. And then just the financial impacts on the local economy and the city of Salina budget. And we've talked about the timing delays. There's 2 slides that occurred to me that might have been worthy of putting in, and I didn't, and that is what do we control and what don't we control? And obviously we don't control a whole lot in this scenario. There's not an easy path forward. What we control is our budget, and we've got a few items remaining that we intend to staff through, but we have kind of taken a line item look with you at our budget in detail. So what have we done? As I've mentioned, we've reviewed the legislation, so we had a good understanding of it. We temporarily amended the personnel manual to provide both 80 hours of City of Salina, what I'm calling COVID paid leave, as well as make provision for the 80 hours of, or at least allow for the 80 hours of federal emergency paid leave, and then we have 120 hours of COVID leave advancement. And that, you know, we were on the leading edge there as well in terms of our interpretation of the Families First Act and our thinking that the 80 hours of emergency paid leave would pick up a stay-at-home order, and that conversation kind of turned 180 degrees. We came back to you and we amended our policy. Then it turns out our interpretation was how the Department of Labor interpreted it, but we left our 80 and the other 80 in place, so our employees had the benefit of 160 hours of paid leave in a stay-at-home order scenario. They can use leave that they have on the books with us if necessary, and they can advance another 120 hours of leave. So you know, rather than dialing that back, we left it in place. So we've, as you know, we've reviewed our finances and budget in detail. We've reviewed available financial forecasting information and data to try to prepare our own forecast, and we prepared multiple revenue forecasts for you, a 30-day stay-at-home order scenario, a 60-day, and a 90-day, and that doesn't necessarily mean that has to be consecutive. That could be in, out, in terms of stay-at-home orders. Additionally, then, we've reviewed in detail all the non-personnel expenditure categories: commodities, contractual services, capital outlay, interfunds, other expenses, and all of our outstanding project contracts and whether we wish to go forward with them or not. So again, some of this information is for the listeners at home, but we've provided a breakdown of where our general fund revenue comes from. 30% of that is sales tax, and sales tax is most likely the revenue source to be impacted the most. So yeah, that just compounds the significance of the impacts of all this on our budget. Additionally, then, how are our general fund expenses distributed? And there's 63% in just personnel and benefits, and another 10% in healthcare and work comp. So there's the 73% of all of our expenses that are personnel related. So that really, when you're trying to recover or balance the budget on that remaining percentage, it just doesn't leave a lot of room. So we did try to leave personnel decisions and adjustments to the end. So what revenues have been impacted? We've been through all of this. I provided just a very summary table of our revenue line items and our assumed losses in a 30, 60, or 90-day scenario. So when we talk about we have a $2 million gap to fill, that's because we started with as much as a $5.6 million gap, and all the other things that we've already just talked about that we've done have gotten it down to $2 million. And I would note as well, that's assuming the things that we talked about in the sales tax capital fund and netting out those to get to that $2 million. What revenue impacts have we forecasted? Essentially that, and I'm shade colorblind, but to me that's a salmon-y, pinky gray color in the top of the pie chart there. That lost revenue is 13% of the budget. So that's the gap we're trying to close. What expenditure reductions have been identified? As you know, in terms of personnel, our first pass was at temporary staffing, and so we looked at that and the employee benefits. We made a first and a second pass at commodity projections. Our first pass was $219,000, and then we identified another $103,000. We made a pass at contractual services, and first and second pass found $450,000 and then another $112,000. And capital outlay, now I would tell you, this is just the run-of-the-mill capital outlay within a department's budget. Photocopiers and staplers, and this is not police cars and motor graders. And so there was $176,000 identified out of capital outlay. So then lastly, there's a table there that is the reductions to the sales tax capital expenditures that we went over with you, and that totaled $2.5 million. So, a question that comes up in the conversations that I'm in are, can sales tax capital fund savings offset general fund shortfalls? We talked about that. It all comes down to the ballot language, and there was a laundry list of things that sales tax revenue was communicated that it would be used for. One of those is preserving a stable property tax rate. So at your discretion, I think, and you indicated at least a receptivity to considering that somewhere out in the future, that if need be, those capital sales tax fund savings could be used to offset the general fund shortfalls. But it alone is not enough. So what remaining shortfall are we left with? That's the next table. And again, there's a 30, 60, 90-day scenario, general fund shortfall, sales tax fund, and net gain because of the cuts that we identified, and then a net amongst all those. So, you know, in a 30-day scenario, our projection was 883,000. However, I just mentioned earlier, it looks like we're headed past 30 days. In the 90-day scenario, that's where the 2.1 number comes in. And I'm hopeful that's a worst-case scenario, but as I've told some of our department heads, we could be off by an order of magnitude in terms of our revenue projections. I hope not, but we could be. So, will financial impacts be limited to the duration of the stay-at-home order? And I appreciate people asking that question and the desire that that's the case, but my answer is no, definitely not. We know enough about our sales tax losses already that we are not going to be able to, we'll have no recovery of revenue in that 30-day stay-at-home order. It will definitely extend beyond the stay-at-home orders. It's just a question of how significantly and how long. So our ability to recover, everything we've tried to do is recover within the fiscal year 2020, but it will definitely extend beyond the stay-at-home order. And so our need to make staffing changes and the impact on service levels are going to extend beyond the stay-at-home order as well. Why not draw upon the city's reserve balances? That question comes up frequently. That may become necessary if this event continues to unfold, but it wouldn't be prudent to start there and do nothing else. Now's the time to consider budget and service reductions. Additionally, some of these federal programs that we're trying to take advantage of expire in July, so it would be in our own financial best interest as well as our employees to try to take advantage of those and not just draw upon reserves and miss that opportunity. Over a number of years, the Great Recession of 2008, which potentially could be less significant than this, drew our reserve balances down to an unacceptably low level, and it's taken us years to kind of plan and recover. At this point, our general fund reserves are about 15% of our annual budget, and 15% of 12 months is 1.8 months. And I'm not saying that we would go 2 months with no revenue, but we could go 4 months with 50% revenue, and if we do, then that taps our reserves. So one of the first things you communicated to staff was your desire to protect reserves for a lot of the reasons that I'm stating now. So that's, I guess that's the bulk of the reason why not to draw upon reserves. Again, I understand this question as well. Why are certain projects being allowed to continue? As you know, as the governing body, we reviewed all of our existing contractual commitments as it relates to projects. I would acknowledge that we have some other contractual commitments that I committed to you we would review, and we will get to those, but we've been concentrating on this. So with respect to each one of those projects, we looked at the total project cost, the costs incurred to date, the percentage of the project was complete, the additional billable expenses that were pending since the last invoice, the recent labor material that had been incurred, material purchases and fabrication that had been authorized and were underway but yet to be billed that we would be responsible for. We looked at the source of the funding, whether it was coming out of the 2020 budget or whether it was debt finance, because that impacts the significance of any savings of canceling a project. We looked at then the potential savings as well as the short and long-term costs of canceling contracts. We went through, I believe, 41 projects with you one afternoon and evening, and we made an individual decision on each one of those. So the work that's continuing at this point is what we collectively deemed as an existing contractual commitment that needed to be honored. And I would tell you and the listeners at home, new commitments and or additional phases of projects are not being pursued at this time. One specific question, and I used it as an example, is the river renewal design project. That design has been contracted in phases, and I believe, I'm working from memory, but I think the phase that we're currently in is about 95% complete. So we said, let's finish the other 5%. But we didn't say, let's just keep moving forward at the same pace for the river project, where the rest of that is on hold. So case by case, project by project decisions have been made in that regard. So then, what's been done regarding personnel? We looked at the personnel manual updates in anticipation of the stay-at-home order. We did an essential and non-essential designation of employees in anticipation of the stay-at-home order, and that is not at all a reflection of their worth as an employee, and it's not a reflection that they were going to be treated that way as it relates to extended personnel decisions. In fact, I think we'll see that some are not at all treated the same, given the longer duration of what we're talking about. We did not, as I mentioned before, just indiscriminately apply a government essential service designation out of concern for safety for the employees that could observe a stay-at-home order. We conducted a thorough review allowing for the employees' exposure risks. We significantly reduced staff levels. We're already working at greatly decreased staffing levels, and we anticipated and accepted that we would have reduced service levels in order to allow our employees to meet the intent of the stay-at-home order. We created the 80 hours of paid COVID leave, as well as the made provision to be prepared to have the 80 hours of federal emergency paid leave. We did the 120 hours of leave advancement. We did budgeted revenue and expense projections, assuming elimination of seasonal part-time labor for 2020. We did the review of all the federal programs, trying to figure out how we could take advantage of them. We did financial modeling of furloughing, unemployment, and pandemic pay. And then on April 13th, we walked you through a staffing presentation, and the bullet points of which are on the slide there. And then at the April 13th meeting, you unanimously voted to direct staff to bring back to you a proposal that included furloughs and work sharing, which is the presentation we're making today. So the possibility of voluntary mandatory pay reductions had been discussed, as well as reductions in force, with a limited exception about pay reductions for department heads. That is not part of the proposal that I'm presenting to you today. So there continues to be, and understandably so, continues to be questions about the difference between a furlough and a layoff. And on the assumption that we have employees listening, and it's an important question, a furlough generally is intended to retain the employees. The leave balances don't have to be exhausted. They stay on our books and they're frozen while the employee is furloughed. The employer can continue to provide benefit contributions, health insurance in particular, and so in a furlough situation, that's the case. In a layoff, it's considered a separation from employment, and the intention is to return to work is less certain. The leave balances have to be exhausted or paid out, and benefits such as health insurance are not provided by the employer. They're provided through COBRA, which is much more expensive for the employee. And so it's our understanding that an employee is likely to be eligible for unemployment in either scenario, so we've focused on furloughing rather than a layoff. So what are the impacts on the financial savings of some of these approaches? A furlough on a short-term approach, we're definitely going to have lost productivity. We might lose employees that are looking to find other jobs, and it will result in significantly decreased service levels. We would see 100% salary savings, and the $600 a week supplement would be available until July 25th. In a work share scenario, again, lost productivity, but not at 100%, significantly decreased service levels, and we might lose employees to other jobs. The financial savings can range from 20 to 40%, depending on the work share approach, and the $600 a week supplement is available. Pay cuts, just across the board, or mandatory pay cuts of some kind, obviously are harmful to the employees financially. We could lose employees as a result of that. Could lose productivity and morale. It's another setback in terms of what we're trying to accomplish on our pay plan, and the unemployment and $600 supplement benefit is uncertain in that scenario. From a financial savings standpoint, there would be partial salary savings at whatever percentage rate the reduction was implemented at. But the 20% is the minimum threshold for a work share program, and 40% is the maximum. So if the assumption is a 10% pay reduction, it's less benefit than a 20% work share, and it has ramifications for us and the employees. So federal pandemic unemployment compensation is a very important component of what we're proposing to you today. We've covered this before, but I think it's important and hopefully reassuring for employees to know that if an employee is eligible to receive at least $1 of underlying unemployment benefits for the week, they receive the full $600 unemployment payment. That is a direct quote from the information that we've been able to find. So it may seem a little counterintuitive, but the $600 is not prorated or in any type of proportion. It's in full. It's administered by the state. It's anticipated to begin in a couple weeks. They have said they will make retroactive payments. Another point worth noting is our next payroll is May 1st, and that would be a full pay period. Before we would implement anything that we're proposing today. So if there is some lag time in terms of the state's rollout of work share and the pandemic pay, hopefully there's a full paycheck May 1st, there's retroactive payments from the state, and employees don't see a significant gap in funds. It is received in addition to the Kansas unemployment payment, and it can result in an employee receiving combined compensation that exceeds their current base pay with us. And we have definitely taken that into account. When we talk about break even, we've tried to calculate that overage, for lack of a better word, and then extend work share to a point where they break even. And it expires in Kansas on July 25th. So our proposed model is based upon the specific duties of each employee and conferring with department heads. Each individual position has been reviewed for possible furlough, 40% work share, which would be the equivalent of working 3 days a week, or 20% work share, which would be working 4 days a week. And as you had conversation about, the department heads, I feel obligated to say, yes, the department heads had a conversation. They participated in this, and I am appreciative of their willingness to offer up these solutions. They remain understandably, rightfully concerned about how aggressive this is and the ability to meet expectations and the likelihood of unforeseen challenges. So that's why I stressed earlier, we're going to have to continue to adapt. We did not, hold back and stop short and say, this is a no-brainer, this is going to be easy to implement. This is a pretty aggressive approach, and I want to give the department heads credit for that, but I also want to just qualify that they have reservations. So as part of this model then, we estimated each employee's weekly total compensation in comparison to their current base pay, and partial city wages, in that 20 or 40% scenario, partial unemployment based on that shortfall of wages and how that would be calculated, and then the $600 a week of pandemic pay. We then estimated the compensation in excess of their base pay. We had estimated the duration the employee could be furloughed or work shared before their combined excess compensation and their reduced compensation would net out to zero or to avoid going negative. So that accounts for compensation in excess, and it assumes that each employee is going to save that excess to have it available to offset the shortfall later as they're in a work share or furlough scenario beyond July 25th. So I provided to you an example calculation. I won't go through all those numbers, but what I would tell you is everything we've done is on gross pay. So there's questions about what about taxes, and are taxes held out or not, and health insurance benefits. This is all of our calculations were, here's what their gross pay would have been, and then taxes and health insurance would come out of that. And when we calculate the gross pay on the backside, then that considers taxes and other costs the same, and they should be apples to apples. So in this scenario of a $25 an hour employee and a 40-hour work week, you can see that they have almost $5,900 of compensation in excess by July 25th, and then $2,500 shortfall from July 25th through 32 weeks to get them to the end of the year. And they actually net positive of about $3,700 by year end. I guess that's one of the things I should tell you. As we modeled the work share program can be for a year, and so some employees could have had work share extended into spring of next year. We capped it at the end of this calendar year. It just felt like it's going to be hard enough to maintain these service levels and respond to the public's expectations through the end of the year. Carrying it into next year was just more than we built into the assumption. I guess if it comes down to it, that might be some additional savings that could be identified. So, as I mentioned, the proposed model assumed work sharing through the end of the year. It, without a doubt, significantly sacrifices service levels due to the staffing reductions and the hours to the public. If we're on a 20% work share, and that's 4 days a week, that probably the most effective way to implement that would be to have our offices open 4 days a week. That doesn't mean that some people won't be working 5 days a week, but we just don't have staffing levels to maintain that, and it avoids the need to try to take what limited staff time we have and cover reception desks and phones and things like that for 5 days a week. I would tell you, in the recession of 2008, there were examples of communities that took that approach. Some of them did it thinking it was utility savings driven, and others it was staffing level driven. So in this model, the city payroll savings are realized due to the decreased work levels, and the employee is financially backstopped by unemployment and the pandemic unemployment compensation. We've conducted an individual review for each employee, and the calculations are not going to be exact. If they have outside employment, if their base quarters that unemployment uses, well, it may vary a little bit, but we feel fairly confident that we are not off significantly based on what we know. So, the other thing to note is work share is more financially beneficial to the city than a 10% pay reduction, because we're able to work share at a minimum of 20% rather than 10%, and then that makes the employee eligible for the unemployment. And the proposed approach extends work share, accounting for that compensation. And the proposed approach transitions department heads to 10% pay reduction once that break-even point is hit, whether they're furloughed or work shared. When they break even and the 20% work share format actually would be impacting them 20%, my proposed model is to do a pay reduction of 10%. I would tell you, depending on the department head's rate of pay and whether they are 20% or 40%, that length of time varies. But there are 3 employees that would be 10 to 12 weeks, and then the remainder, the 22 to 24 weeks, would be a 10% pay reduction. There are 6 department heads that would be 17 weeks in a 20% work share program and 16 or 17 weeks at a 10% pay reduction. And there are 2 that would be at a 20 to 22 week scenario for the 20% pay reduction, and then 12 to 14 weeks of 10% pay reduction. On principle, that the highest paid employee will run out of break even the soonest and be on the 10% pay reduction the longest, and will have the highest financial impact of a pay reduction. So trying to balance some of the conversation you had previously and the expectation you communicated, while still maximizing the benefit of the work share program. Service level reductions, they're going to be significant in most departments. It's going to correspond to the reduction in, we're going to have a corresponding reduction in service level expectations. And I think that probably is one of the biggest concerns of the department heads, and understandably, it's hard to shift their thinking from what we always do and the service we always provide. And I've had to just kind of reassure them and be forceful that it's not reasonable to expect we're going to reduce staffing levels like we're talking about and continue to maintain the service levels we do today. So I mentioned the implementation of a 4-day work week in offices, employees returning to work on varying schedules depending on when break even occurs for them, and that the impacts of the reductions will be felt through year end. Reductions in force was something that we talked about, and I mentioned I don't have it in this proposal. If the numbers get worse, we may need to talk about that. And if the concern is just organizationally, do we need to talk about right sizing or zero-based budgeting or budgeting for outcomes? That's more of a budget conversation. We certainly can have that. But in these tough times, my focus was trying to come up with a way for employees to break even, not implement a reduction in force right in the middle of a tough time to go find another job. So staffing tables. Tried to provide you some summary there. The first one is just our distribution of employees currently. We have 478 full-time employees, 4 classified part-time employees, 4 regular part-time employees, which totals 486. This does not at all contemplate the 88,000 hours of part-time work that we hire for the Parks Department alone. That is all seasonal labor. 25,470 of those hours are mowing and maintenance. Another, I think, around 25,000, I could be wrong about that number, is Kenwood Cove. So there's a lot of seasonal part-time that is not in this staffing table. So having gone through everything that I just described in terms of meeting with department heads and trying to put a plan together, the next table is our proposed staffing approach, department by department. And we have positions vacant across the organization, and for the most part, we've assumed those vacancies will continue through the end of the year. We have a handful of employees that are in the military reserves and that are deployed, and so we've taken that into account as well. We're recommending 32 furloughs, and when I refer to a furlough, in my mind, I mean they're 100% off during the furlough. We recommended 65 at a 40% work share, which is 3 days a week. We recommended 127 at a 20% work share, which is 4 days a week, and left 225 working full-time. I intended all along, and I hope I'm not straying too far into the weeds, but to give you a little bit more context about that, department by department, in the Arts and Humanities Department, everyone is furloughed with the exception of 3 individuals that are all on 40% work share. The department head and 2 staff people that are needed to help in terms of accounting, bookkeeping, and maintaining the museum. So I would say that's a very aggressive approach to Arts and Humanities, with 12 of their 16 staff, I believe it is, being furloughed, 15 staff being furloughed. In the city manager's office, we have 3 employees proposed for 40% work share and 2 employees proposed for 20% work share. The 20% work share is myself and executive assistant. She's been able to work from home and answer phones and provide support to the city commission and to me and to cover phones. And we just felt like as we're calling special meetings and doing everything we need to do, 4 days a week was appropriate. In the computer technology department, they work 24/7, or they're at least available 24/7. They are short-staffed. They already have a vacancy and a staff. I recently promoted a staff person to interim department head. They were very gracious in accepting that and agreeing not to backfill their position. So they're basically taking on one and a half to 2 times as much work. So we focused the 20% work share, we focused the full-time work on kind of the support techs that keep the system going, and the 40% work share are the people that provide more office and software support and those type of things, recognizing that everyone in our organization is just going to have to be patient, that if they need tech support, that's going to take longer. In the development services department, They probably had the widest breadth of services that they provide, and they were surprisingly creative in terms of their approach. None of their employees are full-time. There are 4 employees that are furloughed, 2 of those being building inspectors, and 1 of those being in the Community Relations Department, and 1 of those being a planner, 1 out of 3. The Community Relations Department is our affirmative action housing discrimination division. They have active claims. They provide a valuable service. It does duplicate service provided by the state. So we tried to look at just kind of case volume and what we could do to staffing-wise to kind of maintain an acceptable level of service. So then everyone else is at a 20% work share. And the thing I would note there is the number of vacancies. We, just because of recent retirements and resignations, we have some key administrative staff that are vacant, and Development Services is proposing to leave those positions vacant and make do. The fire department, the vast majority, 81 of them, remain full-time. And that's our firefighters, our EMTs, the people that are staffing the stations. The individuals that are furloughed are a fire inspector out of 3 total, and 2 individuals that are at a 40% work share, one of those being an inspector, one of them being administrative staff. At the 20% level, we tried to identify everyone else that works an office, administrative, managerial, more of a Monday through Friday 8 to 5 schedule, and that was 3 individuals: the department head, the fire chief, training chief, and an office business manager. In finance and administration, we had, 14 altogether, and I'd note the finance and administration is truly finance, the city clerk's office, account payable, account receivable, and water customer accounting. So there's 6 individuals that are at a 40% work share, and those are everything from the deputy city clerk and customer accounting reps and accounting tech. We had quite a bit of a conversation. If we have multiple water customer accounting staff on 3-day work weeks, can we get enough overlap so that we have the office staffed on all the days that we're open, and then the remainder of the department is on a 20% work share. Human Resources only has 4 employees in it to begin with, and they've been overwhelmed with everything that we've had. I shouldn't say overwhelmed. I've never seen Natalie look overwhelmed in all of this. But the amount of work has been incredible. So quite a few people staying home in that department right now. We fully anticipate when we implement work share, furlough, unemployment, and all the paperwork that goes with it, their work volumes, I don't know what percentage to say it's going to go up. So what we did in that department was a 20% work share for all 4 employees. That's 4 days a week. Municipal court, I know we had some conversation about that and previously, and there's really 2 things going on here. If municipal court is not in session because of stay-at-home orders, then the intention would be to furlough everyone but the judge, the court supervisor, the court supervisor, and the prosecutor, so that they can continue to process, what they're doing today in terms of orders and that type of thing. But everyone else will be furloughed. In the scenario where court is in session and able to, hear cases, now we're in catch-up mode. They already have a vacancy, and so at that point, we assume that they would be fully staffed to try to catch up on the backlog that's being created. In the Parks and Rec department, that one's a little bit harder to summarize, but what I would tell you is out of 50, well, first of all, I touched on it before, the part-time reduction alone is 88,000 hours that we've already said we're not going to staff. And I think that's about, if you look at the season that they work in, I think that's about 25 full-time employees that equivalent. Then on top of that, and recognizing that 25,470 of those hours are mowing and maintenance, on top of that then, we are reducing the workload or the work schedule of all but 10 of the 55 remaining parks employees. And the 10 that are not, that are working full-time are custodial and building maintenance. And the reason being, they've had to accelerate their custodial work. We've had other departments praising them because it's noticeable the work that they're doing. But just in terms of trying to keep up with COVID-19 and sanitation and building maintenance items, we just didn't feel like we could lower those staffing levels. In the police department, that one understandably generates conversation. There's 106 employees in the police department, all told. We furloughed, and we are proposing to furlough one administrative position. We're proposing to have one position go to 3 days a week, and then the remaining 33 that we're proposing, I think it's 32, that we're proposing on a work share are focused at a managerial office Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. That does include detectives. That does include some sergeants and supervisors that function on kind of a 5-day schedule. We've had conversations about, how do we supervise when we're only working 4 days a week? And my response was, they may have to work 5 days a week, just not eight hours each one of those days. And so, those work reductions are not dispatch, are not patrol officers, with the exception of school resource officers. Our agreement with the school district is they compensate us while they're performing school resource officer functions, and then they come back on our schedule in the summertime, and they, kind of our additional staffing that's available in the summer. So rather than furlough, we didn't want to have that much of an impact, want to preserve some staffing flexibility. We propose that they go on a 20% work share. One of the officers that provides security at municipal courts on 20% work share. Detectives, sergeants over traffic and training, additional detectives, support specialists, and support supervisors, and secretaries are the remainder. And that is more than I expected, to be honest, going into it. But after having a detailed conversation with the chief and deputy chief, that's what we were able to identify. I will be the first to acknowledge that detectives don't get to control their schedule. If we have a homicide, it needs to be worked. If we have other things come up, it needs to be worked. And that's an example of, with the best of intentions, if we're on a work share approach, we may have to deviate from it. My hope is that we can be proactive in our scheduling so that we have things accounted for and keep our options open, but we just won't be able to control all that. The other thing I should have mentioned earlier is the work share program looks at a work week. And they look at, if we say they're on a 20% work share and they're going to work 32 hours, then they need to work 32 hours in that week. If they work 33 hours in that week, that doesn't meet the work share program, and it causes a problem for unemployment and federal pandemic pay. In that scenario, we need to be cognizant, and so we can't flex out, you worked extra this week, you can work less next week. So if we have an occurrence of overtime at the end of that work week, that's a problem that's going to impact this plan. Hopefully we can schedule differently to have some coverage available in those scenarios, but we are going to have to be light on our feet if something comes up. So that was, we had quite a bit of conversation about whether that was workable or not, and that's what that's what I want to try in the interest of trying to maximize the budget savings. In the Public Works Department, there are a total of 77 employees. The only employees that are remaining full-time in this proposal are related to trash pickup, sanitation, and landfill operation. All other positions in some fashion are furloughed or doing work share. And again, we have been aggressive in terms of trying to reduce service levels. So we've got 40% work share for assistant and clerical type staff, the city surveyor, civil engineers, construction coordinators, engineering techs, GIS supervisor. That we don't necessarily have to be out on a job inspecting it continuously. We do spot inspections, but that will impact our inspection ability out in the field for construction projects. Everyone else is at a 20% work share. And I say that there's a few furloughs that the department identified just based on the employees and they're being relatively new in the function that they perform, that they thought they could get by with furlough. Now, I would tell you, that's a pretty significant reduction in staffing. We did keep a couple on a full-time basis just because of their need to kind of supervise road conditions and schedule work on weekends and perform in a supervisory capacity. So again, this is a pretty aggressive approach in terms of our maintenance abilities and what we're going to be able to do. And then lastly, the utilities department. They're not affected by sales tax. We are monitoring what the future might hold in terms of delinquent water accounts and things like that, and water consumption. So we started out saying we're going to take the same approach, and I shouldn't say we. Martha Tasker started out saying her department needed to step up like everybody else. So that's what we're trying to do, and we'll take a look as we get more data whether we might be able to back away from that. In the utilities department, there's 77 employees. There are quite a few that were left full-time. The bulk of those are water plant operators and sewer plant operators. We have a hard enough time keeping those positions filled and getting all of our shifts covered. I do want to acknowledge that they were pretty creative in terms of identifying some people to be on a full-time schedule so that if overtime does arise, they're available. They're also pretty creative in terms of creating a split schedule so that you have somebody working a work share schedule daily, 7 days a week. So that creates a little bit more flexibility. But they have 29 employees that they think that they can put on a 40% work share, which is 3 days a week, and then one employee that is on 20% work share, which is the department head. I did add a slide, and it's really just percentage calculations or comparisons. I thought that might be helpful. I think, as we talk about public safety and compare public safety to the organization-wide changes, and I'm having a little trouble reading it. It appears blurry to me on the screen, but I believe organization-wide, almost 54% of our employees are impacted in some way with this plan, furlough or work share. In the public safety departments of fire and police, that's more like 24, 25%. And so if you focus just on non-public safety, 75% of our non-public safety employees are impacted one way or the other. And I say impacted, I at least take a little bit of consolation in hopefully being able to balance the financial impacts for our employees with work share and federal pandemic pay. We did a calculation today, and we believe that the $600 a week payment in the plan that we proposed represents $135,000 a week for our organization, and about $1.6 million over between now and July 25th. That, combined with savings on employee benefits, is how we were able to get to about $1.9 million of that $2.1 million gap we were trying to close. I am hopeful, and I mentioned it before, well, I shouldn't say I'm hopeful, but if we could get lucky enough to have the federal government say municipalities can get the tax credit on employee and emergency paid sick leave, that's certainly going to help as well and might just get us there. And we provided you some estimated cost reductions on the general fund and all other funds. And I guess the bottom line of all of that is if we do the pay plan or the staffing plan as I've described it to you, we also assumed no longevity pay this year, which we shared with you by way of the personnel manual is within the city manager's discretion, and it specifically contemplates financial difficulties or something to that effect. I also had the 10% executive staff pay reduction beyond the 20% Kansas work share approach. So our estimated total general fund savings at that point is $1,922,000 compared to the net gap in the 90-day scenario of $2.1 million. So, and I hesitate to calculate to this level of detail when we're talking about these type of budget projections, but that gives us a remaining net difference of $184,110. There's employee demographic information that I won't go into in great detail. I'd be happy to answer questions about that. Just in kind of recapping it, there's no easy path forward here. And we certainly could do things differently. It's not going to change the significance of our gap. It's not going to change the significance of our the impact on our employees. I hope, I completely understand from an employee's perspective. I keep hearing how they want to work. It's just hard to be told to stay home. I get that, but we need them to. So, sorry.
Thank you, Mike.
I take consolation in the fact that hopefully we've come up with a financial model that while you're not able to work, we're looking out for your financial best interest the best we can. That's all I've got.
Thank you, guys. Questions for staff? We'll start with
Commissioner Davis. This is a whole lot of work, and I knew in the back of my mind a couple of weeks ago there was a sweet spot that you'd have to work to get the numbers with these different programs to come up, but to do it for one employee, I figured it would probably take 3 or 4 days. To do it for 500 people is a gargantuan task. Aside from practical reasons for implementing this, what message will departments that people most commonly associate with city government, police, fire, water, sewer, what message is going to go out to our customers regarding potential impacts upon service? Obviously, we're not going to say we're not putting out fires on Fridays, but are there any ways in which our citizens need to behave differently or expect to interact with those departments differently?
Yeah, we've had those conversations, and I've tried to reassure departments as they express legitimate fear about that chasm that's going to be there. My vision is that we're going to have to, as clearly as we can, communicate we're at these reduced staffing levels because of financial challenges, and communicate our schedule being 4 days a week. We're going to have to reset expectations. Development Services has prided itself for a long time now of having a 10 business day turnaround. Given the staffing levels, I don't think we're going to be able to do that. What is it we need from citizens? Patience and understanding. I fully understand the clamoring for Kenwood Cove to be open, and the River Festival, and baseball and softball, but you as the governing body know now, as well as anybody, the finances that are behind all this. And so as we talk about, could we reinstate this, that, or the other, we do so many things that are lost leaders that if to reinstate any of those, you collectively are going to have an appetite to lose more money. Until we can get ourselves on the other side of the stay-at-home orders, so we can get our arms around what the financial picture actually looks like, and then kind of reset. So of the departments you mentioned, I'd add Parks and Rec. That one concerns me as much or more than many. I mean, from a public safety standpoint, as you said, fire, I don't see a service reduction in terms of responding to fire emergency. Fire inspections, yes, and some administrative. Police, they're challenged more than fire in this proposal, but that's a lot of investigation, detectives, supervisory. I'm hopeful that they can band together and put a plan together that isn't very noticeable as a service level reduction. But you're absolutely right. The other departments are the ones that streets, they've really stepped up in terms of, we'll try to make this work, but it's going to be noticeable.
And just one last follow-up, and I'll sit quietly for a while. As far as not just building inspections, but the permitting, I forwarded something to you earlier, or probably last week, about review of plans, because there is a segment of our community that is working, which is the construction business. So it's a group of families which are still employed because there's stuff still being built. Is there any plan to change the way we process things? Not so much taking more time, but are there ways to streamline or shorten the actual process so that a fewer number of people can keep things moving in a reasonable period of time?
Well, yes, and if it's any consolation, our staffing and service levels are going to get better than they are in the stay-at-home order. So what we're dealing with right now is lower in terms of the staff hours committed. So we'll be able to step it up a little bit. But we have gotten our online presence up and running, and I honestly don't know how many people are taking advantage of that. The habit might be to continue to submit by paper, but that's an opportunity for some efficiency. I think we haven't had an opportunity to go through it, but in the past when we were trying to find efficiencies, we looked at, taking a different approach to processing paperwork and inspections and trying to really zero in on, is there a way that we can, identify what's absolutely necessary and cut out any inefficiencies, and we'll continue to try to do that.
Okay, this probably would be my last question, but as far as Planning Commission review, our rules state that if it's not reviewed within a certain period of time, the applicant can proceed as if it was...
It varies depending on the application. So some are presumed approved, some are presumed denied. In this interim period, we've been paying attention to that. We have had conversations and are going to need to have some more about, if the stay-at-home order continues, some meeting format for Planning Commission. Lauren Driscoll, the department head, has been researching that, and frankly, I put her off till next week so I could get through this, and then we can have that conversation. But whether it's a different venue, we've taken a little bit different approach on the way we're conducting our meetings, and it may be a little clunky, but my motivation was to allow for public comment in a format that worked versus, I've seen other formats where it's a online meeting, but all you get to do is observe as a citizen. And it does look like we have citizens that want to participate today. So my focus on these meetings, as well as Planning Commission, is trying to accommodate that public comment. And so we've looked at a different venue format. Can we, accommodate social distancing and some of our Planning Commission items pack the house, or do we need to look at a different technology? So we're pursuing that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Franz, questions?
I am really pleased that everybody stepped up to the plate to the extent that they did. I had, I have a little bit of concerns. I'm sure all of us do about the public safety departments, and I know they've done some things already. For example, I know the police department has implemented the emergency accident reporting plan with the intent of reducing contact, but that also reduces workload for the officers on the street, and that's important. And I'm glad to see that the fact that the schools are not in session. We've got the school resource officer program that provides them with some additional assistance to maybe be a little more flexible in providing some reductions in overall time. I think without that, it would probably be very difficult to accommodate that. I am a little bit concerned about your comments about the detectives division and the need for them perhaps to put in hours in excess of the shared work program in some circumstances when that is merged with your comments about failing to qualify for the shared work program. That's going to be a very delicate, I think, balancing act that the staff is going to have to do in that case, and we may find out that we have to change that on the fly at some point, or that you have to change it on the fly. I'm pretty much pleased with the outcome. It's you know, as hard as it is, it's still a little short of what we need, you know, but I'm pleased we've gotten this far, you know, and maybe in 60 or 90 days when we know a little bit more, we can either roll it back or ramp it up a little bit depending on what we know at that point.
Yeah, if I could respond a little bit, I was remiss in failing to acknowledge that overtime's been a killer for the police department and the fire department for years. We've had conversations for quite some time about, you know, being short-staffed in the police department in particular, and if we had better staffing levels, we might be able to take a different approach to scheduling and help with overtime. And so 2 weeks ago now, maybe a week and a half ago, they were able to implement 410s instead of 8-hour shifts, and that creates a 2-hour overlap so an officer can come off the patrol and finish the reports. And it's probably too soon to tell, but that 1 week where we had it, there was a noticeable improvement in terms of overtime reductions. So the SROs help in terms of, rather than just furlough some officers, hopefully that keeps that staffing level to where we can see gains in terms of overtime. And that's something that Chief and Deputy Chief have wanted to do for a long time, and they've finally been able to implement it, and they've been crunching the numbers and monitoring the data the best they can. As far as work levels in general, we're seeing shifts, and you know, we're also monitoring what Wichita is seeing in some other places, and they're seeing increases in domestic abuse and burglary and more severe crimes. I can't say that that's been the case here in Salina just yet, but we have not seen just a precipitous decrease in activity. It's been a shift. So,
Commissioner Franz, again, you know, I was expecting there to be some kind of shift in that sort of activity simply because of the circumstances. And now I've forgotten my other comment, so you know, if it comes back, I'll interject.
Commissioner Ryan, any questions?
No questions. I mean, I think that the key is just to stay nimble in this, and we're motivated by the circumstances, and I just appreciate how thorough and candid that staff has been. We can't expect any more out of you to take that approach with this problem, so thank you.
Commissioner Hodges.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Hodges here. I'm going
to start with my general questions and then work into the more specific ones that I have. The first one is, what conversations have we had with the state of Kansas concerning the shared work program and our application?
We haven't had a whole lot of opportunity to have a conversation with the state because they're getting 1.6 million phone calls from people trying to file for unemployment. So our efforts have been researching what information they have available, researching the law, and reaching out to other employers that have been through this before. But our understanding, I think Ms. Fisher reported, maybe it was last week, that we've been told that other employers in this current cycle have had their plans turned around in 24 hours up to 3 days. So, yeah, this is all predicated on us submitting a plan, the state turning it around in a timely manner and approving it.
Mayor Hoppick here. If I
just to be clear, we have not reached out
directly, formally or informally, to the shared work program at this point.
No, we've based all this on their publications.
Mayor Hoppick, Commissioner Hodges, can I finish up? I had a question on that. Also, I'd like to follow up on what happens to the employees that are scheduled to be on that work share program? What's their status until that's approved by the state?
Fisher, HR Director. There are provisions within the application and the certification levels that the employer submits to the state, where the state acknowledges that in some circumstances they will allow the plan to be applied retroactively. So worst case scenario is it takes a few days to certify, because I'm anticipating that we have several different plans to divide up our work units that if they have questions or have the ability to come back and there is a little bit of delay, that given our circumstances, we could request the application of it to happen prior to the point that the date that they approve it. If that answers your question.
Okay. So we will implement it right away, or we have to wait till it's approved?
We would. My understanding is we would have the ability to implement it right away.
Okay.
Along with some of the operational challenges, stay-at-home order status, those circumstances, we might not be implementing every one of our work plans on the same date. There could be a staggered approach.
Okay. Sorry, Commissioner Hodges, I just wanted to follow up on that because I did have a similar question to you, so. Okay, go ahead.
And I appreciate that question because that's really good information to have. And I think it kind of does, I mean, right now we are counting on that shared work program to help out, 200 of our employees. So I think that I would like to see whether or not we have a formal application ready to go or not. I think it behooves us to at least reach out and let them know that it's in the pipeline, it's coming. Are there things that we need to be specifically aware of, especially as it applies to any retroactive benefits that we can get for our employees, depending on how long our application takes. My next question was about health insurance. And I wasn't sure when are our current enrollment periods.
Natalie?
Do we have like specific, like December and June, or some kind of twice a year opportunities for employees to enroll in health insurance?
Yeah, Natalie Fisher, HR Director. So we have an open enrollment period that is late in the year with our benefit year that begins February 1. Throughout the year, qualifying events is what they're called in the benefits speak, would allow amendments and changes to happen within 30 days of those qualifying events. And new employees also have a window of when benefit elections can occur.
Great. And my question really is,
would the loss of an employee's insurance, for example, if the employee accesses health insurance from his or her spouse, would the loss of that insurance be considered a qualifying event?
Natalie Fisher, yes. It could go either way. If the employee would say, I'm a little uneasy on this coverage because my significant other, or I should say my spouse, obtained employment over here and the plan looks better and I want to change, that's a qualifying event where they could end coverage with us. Spouse.
Okay, so it doesn't even need to be
a termination of the covered or a separation from employment from the covered spouse. It can just be a simple, I've reevaluated and I now want to get coverage under the city's plan versus my spouse's plan.
Natalie Fisher, as long as that other employer had a means for their employee to have a qualifying event. So the example is, let's say a spouse starts new employment and they like that other employer's coverage better, which occasionally, not frequently, but occasionally does happen. That would be, divorce, marriage, birth of a child, loss of employment. Those are all things characterized as a qualifying event.
okay.
Thanks. And I did just want to confirm about if the spouse of an employee who was providing the insurance coverage lost his or her job, that the employee could then access insurance for the family, or at least for the employee and the spouse, through our plan.
Yes.
Commissioner, Mayor Hoppick here, Commissioner Hodges, I'm going to butt in again. On health insurance, just for the public, I want to make sure everyone knows, those that are furloughed and those that are on work share will remain under, if they have our health insurance coverage, that remains, correct?
Natalie Fisher, correct.
Okay.
The city under the proposed plan is continuing the contribution for the employee, and the employee's cost share continues.
The share stays the same.
For
cost share.
those that would be in a furlough situation, the approach that we would plan is to work independently with that individual on a payment type schedule.
Thank you.
And in that scenario, it's still their payment of their share of the health insurance. The need for the payment is because all their compensation is from unemployment and federal pandemic at that point.
Right. Okay, Commissioner Hodges.
But when they're furloughed, the employer's contribution is considered income?
No, if you recall, on the work share program, it's not. And just straight up unemployment, the rules look pretty clearly like that counted as compensation, but we were told they don't administer it that way, which made me a little nervous. But in the work share, well, so in a work share scenario, it's not a question.
All right. Commissioner Hodges, continue.
Okay, thank you very much.
In the proposal, as we've seen it in the resolution, or in the PowerPoint plan, seasonal temporary employees, we're not going to fund those this year. Does that represent the de facto closure of Kenwood Cove? Because I've received a lot of questions about Kenwood Cove and about Parks and Recs program. And if we're counting the savings to help us close the gap, when are we, does that mean that Kenwood Cove is going to be closed, and when would we make that announcement?
It does assume that to be the case, and I recognize we'll need to make that announcement soon. Other programming that's further into the season, if we have an opportunity to get more information and revisit our finances, we can take those up as more new information allows. I'm not prepared to say that everything's canceled through the end of the year, but all the budget numbers that we presented to you assume kind of that worst case scenario financially and no part-time employees for 2020. So as relates to Kenwood Cove, I think the timing is such that we're going to have a hard time getting lifeguards, and we're not going to have a financial turnaround fast enough for Kenwood Cove. But other Parks and Rec programming, I think we just need to look at the timing and make a decision far enough in advance of each one of those.
Okay, thank you very much. And then
I have some follow-up questions regarding, I'm sorry, Commissioner Hodges here, I keep forgetting to say that. I have some follow-up questions regarding specific departments. The first, and unfortunately, they all cost money, so they're probably not things that you want to hear at this point, but I understand that we may not be able to close the gap entirely this year. I mean, obviously we need to do what we can to get that as close as possible, but I also think that we need to realize what we're asking of our workers, and the first one is in the Human Resources Department. And I would see that Human Resources is going to be absolutely besieged with questions. And you had noted in an earlier presentation that basically there will probably be as many different adaptations to this shared work program, as there are employees and different timelines. So is it reasonable to be cutting our human resources staffing across the board when we're going to be experimenting with a new program that sounds to me to be pretty complicated to administer, and also with the new federal program that we're hoping will supplement our employees as well?
We share the concern. Mike's Craig. I've been even worse than any of the rest of you in saying my name. We share the concern. We had quite a bit of conversation about that, and when I say there's need for some discretion on the city manager's part, that's probably as good of an example as any of our intent is to try, and if it's just not working, then on being light on our feet, we may have to say, okay, does this, and it is on a weekly basis, so do we identify that 1 week out of the month is bad and we need to staff up differently, and recognizing that impacts the savings? Within that level of latitude, I see that as a decision that I would make on a case-by-case basis. If we end up having to deviate too far from this plan and our financial savings is just too significantly impacted, then I think I would have to bring that back to the governing body.
Right, and I agree. And actually, I think that after having these conversations about our employees, it might behoove us to again look at some of the projects and contracts that we've allowed to go forward for the time being. But okay, so at any rate, let me see. I'm reading my notes here, and they're not perfectly organized. Okay, my next question is about the impact that this is going to have on some of our hard-to-fill positions, specifically within a department like Public Works or Utilities. And within Public Works, what I specifically looked at is, we've got workers in a very difficult, dangerous job, doesn't pay great, hard-to-fill position, and we've got the sanitation workers working full-time, and we've got other Public Works employees that are, that at least in the short term are, benefiting from the unemployment program structure. How can we assert? How can we show workers like I said, like utilities, like Public Works, that we value the fact that they are going out there every day and doing during the time of coronavirus a very difficult job? How can we acknowledge them? I've mentioned hazard pay a couple of times, which really hasn't elicited much of a response, but seriously, how can we show our appreciation to them and acknowledge that they're doing a really difficult, dangerous job that could impact not only them but their families?
Hazard pay, Mike's Craig. Hazard pay is probably the most readily, it's the only example I know of that I've seen elsewhere. I have been paying attention to the conversation about hazardous pay being proposed as part of the stimulus package, and as you noted, it's an added cost. If that's something the governing body wishes to entertain, we can do that, and we can run the revised numbers. With respect,
when you're looking at.
When you're looking at, 15, wasn't it 15 sanitation? And I'm just using them as an example. I mean, I think that we have that example in utilities as well. But when you're looking at like 15 employees, I mean, and the overall gap that we're facing, I mean, and I don't know what that looks like. $1 an hour, $2 an hour. We absorb some of their insurance costs. I mean, I don't know what that looks like, but I think it would be helpful for me to know, if that is something that we could implement for, say, $20,000, I think that would be a really excellent investment.
Staff can run the numbers. Easy enough.
Commissioner Franz here, if I might make a comment about, I guess, two things. Number one is I shared your concern about HR, knowing that this is going to affect their workload is probably not going to decrease a whole lot as a result of this. On the other hand, if they're willing to give it a go, I'm certainly willing to support that. The thing about recognizing employees is difficult. The easy thing to do would be to have identified 35 or 50 employees and simply do a layoff. And they lose health insurance, they lose continuity of employment, all of that. I think what we're doing by proposing a combination of furloughs and work sharing, which allows them to keep their health insurance, it allows them to keep their employment in a continuous basis, is in fact stepping forward and trying to do something that is less impactful on those employees that we obviously would like to keep. Going beyond that, as you recognized, I think is very difficult because we're already in a deficit situation. These changes don't fix all of that, And by, backing away and saying now we want to pay someone additional, or we want to change the plan somewhere, that calls for some kind of compensating adjustment somewhere else to keep us in the same position. And that's going to be very difficult. But I recognize your concern. I mean, I get that employees are being asked to do some very difficult things.
Commissioner Hodgins, right, and I agree, and I'm looking specifically to
Frontline employees that are at a much lower pay scale than some of our other folks, but I understand that, and I guess a follow-up question to that, Commissioner France. So, I mean, this proposal, as it's been permitted, I mean, is it an all or nothing adoption through this resolution, or is there room for any compromise or consideration of alternatives?
Commissioner Franz, is that a question for me?
I'm sorry.
I think it's clear that if we have 3 votes to change the proposal, that's obviously on the table.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So,
and then, I'm winding down, I promise.
but Commissioner Hodges, there was one other point there that I thought I'd try to speak to, and you're correct that filling positions has been difficult for us in a number of departments and a number of positions. And I hesitate to say this because I don't want it to be taken the wrong way, but in tough economic times, employment with cities is usually preferred, or those are the times when city employment, longevity, just the tenure you can have, the benefits, the security of those jobs is more appealing. In vibrant economic times, that's typically when cities lose employees to competing private employers. So I don't know what the future holds in this particular circumstance, but kind of repeating Commissioner Franz's point, within the resources we have, trying to do the best we can by our employees, hopefully puts a good foot forward.
Understood. Commissioner Hodges here, and
You provided me with a perfect segue into the final question final series of questions I'd like to ask, and that concerns public safety, specifically the police department. You referenced tough economic times, and I think that data would show us that tough economic times a lot of times translate into a higher crime rate. I know that I've read materials about the fact that we're having social distancing and people are isolating at home has been linked to a higher rate of domestic abuse. And I'm not seeing that as people's desperation grows. I'm just not seeing that as that we're going to see a corresponding decline in crime. And I just wanted to make a couple of points in that we have made significant investments in our police department in the last 2 years. We invested in a retention study. We identified issues that were contributing to turnover, and we're working to address them. We have continued to recruit and train new LEOs, and that represents a significant investment. It's trying to reach our goal, which we are actually very close to reaching, of being fully staffed with LEOs. I guess, has anyone done an assessment of what the proposed recommendations will have on public safety? Meaning, if we're going to be slashing our detectives by detective times by 20%, what impact do you think that will have on public safety?
Well, part of it is a question of whether we can adapt our schedules, and no doubt there'll be a service reduction in terms of the hours available, but hopefully so that might impact clearance rates. that may impact the time in which detectives are able to, call a contact or follow up on an investigation. We're just going to have to monitor a lot of what you just described in terms of, what we're seeing in the way of other police activity and its impacts. If we see that this is not effective or it's too significant and it's unacceptable, then I feel I have an obligation to adapt and report back to you.
This probably gives more insight to my frame of mind than is very helpful to anything in general. But when I looked at the reduction in detectives, I thought, well, detecting work, as you mentioned, comes at any hour of the day or night. Sometimes it has to be done in teams. So if I'm going to commit a crime, I guess now would be my time. So poor Boo ought to be checking his six a lot, but. At any rate, I just think that it's not going to take too much for us to see higher rates of clearing cases, of unsolved cases, and I just don't. Can you? You said you could adapt, but just starting at this point, can we on any level say that the money saved is an acceptable trade-off for jeopardizing citizens?
Well, Mike's Craig. I understand your point. If I thought this were significantly jeopardizing citizens, I wouldn't recommend it. We've had conversations with the chief prior to the pandemic that part of the effectiveness of our clearance rate is concentrating resources on an event shortly after it happens. If those events happen, I anticipate that we may not meet the work share expectations for that week. If a homicide occurs, if another crime occurs, and we need to respond, then we respond. But that at least starts out with an approach that is trying to balance the budget. And if circumstances don't allow it, then I have to be flexible enough not to be regimented and say, regardless of impact on service or regardless of impact on our society, we have a budget plan and there's no wavering. With that, when I say adapt, that's what I mean is certain circumstances, the incident and the public safety aspect of it is going to justify that we're blowing through the work share that week.
Right. A question: Are we fully staffed on detectives? Are we cutting 20% of I think it was 7 detectives and then maybe another 2 other detectives from some other subgroup. But are we 100% staffed on detectives?
I don't want to answer incorrectly. Chief Nelson is on the line. I'm going to unmute him and see if he can help me with that.
Certain circumstances, the incident
thought that sounded like me.
The public safety aspect of it is going to justify that we're going to work here that week. Are we fully staffed on detectives? Are we cutting 20% of I think it's 7 detectives. Are we 100% staffed?
I'm sorry, is that feedback coming from me?
I'm not sure where it's coming from, but somewhere.
We're down 2? Sorry. 2. Oh, is it 3 or 2?
Chief, if you've got the sound on your end, we can't hear you over the sound. Chief, are you there?
I'm not sure who's there right now.
I heard his voice for a second.
I heard that was Chief Nelson's voice.
It was for a while.
Chief Nelson, are you there?
Yes.
I'm sorry. So,
can you hear me?
Yes. Did you decide how many you're down?
I am here.
Okay. Are you able to tell us how many detectives were down?
we're down 3, 1 for military, and we're just down 2 normally because of staffing.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief. Commissioner Hodges here. That's another concern because we're not talking about reducing the workload of 7 detectives. We're talking about reducing the workload of 4 detectives, which I find really concerning. So I would love it if we could take another look at that and maybe talk to some of the detectives. I understand that you've talked with Chief Nelson, and I think it might be helpful to confirm that they know what they're going to do if they reach the magic 30-second hour. I mean, do they clock out? If they end up spending 35 or 36 hours.
Commissioner Hodges.
And they're ineligible for the work share, what do they do next?
Commissioner Hodges, this is Mayor Hoppick. I think we're starting to get into that managing. Again, I think that the staff and that Chief Nelson understands how many detectives he has, and they've worked through that. And now we're starting to get into trying to manage him if they have to work extra hours some week. I don't think that's where we said we were going to go. I think we're getting into, and I understand, I believe
materials that we aren't fully staffed in detectives. If you look at that list, I see 7 detectives, but guess what? We don't have 7 detectives. So I'm sorry if I'm getting a little micromanaging on this question. It's the only question that I have that really pertains to a specific position, but this is public safety, and I want my detectives there doing what they need to do to solve crimes and not being constrained by trying to conform to a work reduction number.
I believe
that's the only foray I am taking into specific staff positions, but I would like to say you're welcome, because now you all know that we are actually at 4 detectives and not 7. And that's all I have.
You know, there are 7 detectives. Yeah. 7 is 3 less than staffing, and across the entire org chart for, I don't have it in front of me, but as it relates to crime scene evidence, all of that, I think the org chart has 17 all told.
Is Police Chief Nelson available? And again, again, we're getting into trying to do Chief Nelson's job, and I think he understands what he has for detectives and what he needs. And in the interest of full disclosure, Mike Scraig here, this has been an uncomfortable conversation with the police department. I share their concern, and what we've said is we're going to have to manage it. Right. We're going to have to see what we are up against. But I guess my intention is we try and see if we can balance all this, and if we can't, then we have to adapt. Mayor Hoppick here. I'm guessing if Chief Nelson is running into a shortage of detectives or whatever it is to do the job that needs to be done, I am fully believe that he will come to the city manager and state that. Would I be wrong? No, you wouldn't. We've had this conversation at a staff level multiple times, and you know the intended approach. I've tried to reassure Chief and the department. There's a recognition that if the need is there, we have to respond. If we can schedule and realize some benefit, we want to try to do that. And if we work that 33rd hour, then they need to work 40 hours. So they're eligible for a full paycheck from us. And then we look on the back end of when their break-even point is, and they may come off of a 20% work share sooner so that they continue to be left whole. Yeah, so. And Chief is on the line and unmuted. Chief, if you
if you have anything you want to add.
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm here. There's nothing I'd like to add. If that was directed to me, you cut out for just a moment.
I was telling Chief Nelson that he's unmuted if he wants to make a comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I did want to be clear. Our numbers are, it's 7. The 3 that we're down would give us 10. So it is, we have 7, but we are down 3, which, is 30% of our detectives, and certainly that is concerning to me. I've expressed my reservations to Mike, and we've talked, and certainly whatever we do today, we're going to make it work. But yeah, it concerns me, sure, because we can't control when crime's going to happen. But I also fully understand we're in quite the financial crisis now.
Mayor Hoppick here, Chief Nelson, if obviously if this becomes unworkable, I'm under the impression that you would contact Commission or City Manager Scragg and make that known to him. Would that be correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And some of this may be after the fact. It may be this is what happened Sunday night, and this is what I had to do.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I just muted you. I'm sorry, I muted you mid-sentence, Chief. Try that again.
I agree with that, this is Chief Nelson. I agree with that assessment, what was just said. It broke up a little bit, but certainly if there's issues, and I've been told repeatedly that if there is a major incident, we are going to respond as we always have, and we'll worry about the money part later. So that part I'm not worried about.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions for staff? I have maybe a couple, and then I think we need to open it up to the public. But
Commissioner Franz here, I just remembered what my other comment was, and that had to...
So your time's expired. No,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It had to do with, the expectation of service levels. And, one example is just recently I had a contact from a citizen who was concerned about their neighbor's yard next door, and that it was in an unpleasant condition, not to her liking. And of course, I didn't see the yard. I don't know what it was. Well, that sort of thing we may not be able to respond to as quickly as we have in the past. It may simply have to go, into a weight hopper for a day or two or a week or whatever it takes to be able to perform that service. And that's just part of this. And there's probably dozens, if not hundreds, of other examples, where the staff is going to have to work triage on these things and take care of the most critical things first, which, of course, at the top of the list is public health and safety threats have to be dealt with. Right. So, for what it's worth.
Mayor Hoppick here, and I think this question's probably for Ms. Fisher. I know at one point when we talked about helping the employees, as far as filing for unemployment for those that are on furlough or on the work share, will we do that as a group for all of them?
Natalie Fisher, yes, we would file both the furlough for any individual. It's that initial claim with the Kansas Department of Labor Unemployment Office, and then the same impact when the shared work plan is filed with the state, and then we begin to certify hours after that's accepted and sent back. So in both cases, yes, we would be taking action, at least the initial action that needs to happen for any of our impacted employees.
Mayor Hoppick here, the additional $600, is that just part of the unemployment, or is that a separate filing?
Natalie Fisher, it is separate from state unemployment benefits provided by the federal government but administered through the state. So the state is in charge of providing that $600 as well. That's some of the criticism they've had with their infrastructure, and they are hoping to have it up and ready for payment disbursement as soon as next week. There has been a delay on that, but there's nothing that has to happen to both the state and the federal level. It's all being handled through the state pending the formal agreements that we're assuming had happened but hadn't seen anything specifically signed, as long as the state has entered into the agreement for the CARES Act with the federal government.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for staff, or we can open it up to the public? Okay.
There's someone that's had their digital hand up for an hour, I think. So I don't have a name, but phone number.
And if you would, if you're listening, when you are recognized, would you please give your name and address for us?
So whoever has the phone number 820-1807, I've unmuted you if you wish to speak to the commission.
Yes, I had one question.
Yes, could you please state your name and address?
Jay.
Okay, go ahead.
I've got one question for you guys. How many of you are going to get out of bed at 1 o'clock in the morning to go to work on a call-in?
On a what night? What type night?
What kind of call? I can be called in at 1 o'clock.
Me too.
I'm probably, this is Commissioner Davis, I'm the wrong person to ask that. I went to work at 11:30 last night after being up all day, and I got home at 1:30. If you have to go, you have to go.
Okay, Jay, do you have another question? Okay. Do we have another caller?
Well, there's such a delay. I want to make sure you heard me.
Never mind. Bye.
So, Julie McKenna, you're unmuted?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Julie.
I was wanting to have the commission address the amount of money that's paid for legal services, $550,000 on an annual basis, sometimes as high as $600,000, and the ability to look at that type of expenditure when you're trying to cut back wages of basically people who are blue-collar workers.
Okay.
This is Mike Sprague. That is a request that's been made. We've done a study session on it. I've committed to revisiting that further. The study session kind of breaks out the extent of those legal services, everything from supporting municipal court to groundwater contamination to services on retainer and then additional legal services. So we, in addition to everything that we've done so far, the things we have left to do are to look at that, to look at all of our other ancillary contracts with different providers, and I've committed to bring that back to the City Commission. My focus so far has been trying to address the staffing plan as requested. I realize I'm not a commissioner. I'm just...
Maybe opening up that position for bids would make it a little bit more competitive.
That would be something, Mayor Hoppecker, that'd be something the commission would have to discuss and move forward, but we'll take that under advisement.
Commissioner Hodges here. I just wanted to thank you for your phone call. This expense has been a concern of mine for years, and I think the time is probably right to reevaluate exactly how we do this. So thank you for your call.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it. And that was the comment that I had and a statement I wanted to make.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if there's any other callers, press star 9, and that will indicate to me that you wish to address the commission. There's a handful of callers, but I don't see anyone pressing star 9. Oh, here we go. Joan Ratzliff, you're unmuted.
And I think the time is probably right to reevaluate exactly how we do this. So thank you for the call. Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it.
Joan, are you there?
A comment that I had and that thing that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Joan, are you there? Joan, are you there? Guess not.
Okay.
Hey, Joan, if you're there, hey, Joan, could you please, Joan? She can't hear. Thank you. That's what I was going to, yeah.
Between the phone and the computer, so it's kind of odd. But anyway, I wanted to say that all the steps that have been taken to keep the workers whole are really impressive, and I want to express my appreciation. In a nutshell, I also want to say that the service that is provided by the city employees is overall very good. I've always been pleased with that. And as a former public servant myself, I appreciate and I can recognize how hard these people are already working. So I'm concerned as a consumer about a reduction of services. And particularly in Parks and Rec, for one. I've also been watching the budget meetings that you've had, and I want to also insert here, I appreciate all the hard work that staff and commission has been doing on this. It's just a lot, and I appreciate the job you're doing. But when it comes to some of the projects that are going forward, the one that really sticks out for me, especially in connection with the pay plan that we're talking about here, is the South Water Treatment Plant. That we haven't broken ground yet, I understand, but we're still going to move forward. And in 2020, that's projected to cost $1.85 million. Plus, there's the $41,000 just for the gas line to that plant. And so I'm wondering, my goodness, if I heard right, that's almost the amount that we're talking about for payroll through 2020, if I heard right. So I would hope that you can go back and look at some of those things again. I appreciate that you looked at them first and looking at cutting payroll last. I love to see that. As a former public servant, I know that's not always the case. So again, thank you very much, and I appreciate what everybody is doing here, and appreciate the opportunity for citizen input.
Hey, Joan, can you hear me? This is Mayor Hoppick. I do not have my material in front of me, but I believe Mike Scragg, I saw him looking up on that South Water. I want him to give you some numbers, because ground has been broken on that, and there's been significant payment, and that's why that's continuing. So, Mike, can you address that?
Mike Scragg, ground has been broken. Quite a few buildings are up and I believe completed. The project is 50% complete. We identified that 90% of the materials have been purchased. We estimated the cost to cancel to be $7.5 to $9.5 million. And we could avoid $5.5 million of that project expense in the short term. assuming that we just stop midway or at whatever percentage we're at. And some of the other things that we discussed when you talked about it last were warranty issues of a contractor not completing their work, being asked to leave the job site, and then another contractor picking the job up, however many years later.
Okay, I just wanted to try to answer that question, so thank you, Joan.
I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have some other callers, and apparently we had some lag time if they're listening to the audio online. So if there's any other callers that wish to address the commission, they need to press *9.
We'll give it a little bit because that one was pretty delayed. Anything, Mike?
Nope.
Okay. Okay, with that, I guess we'll bring this back to the commission, and I guess at this point we need to address the resolution. Do we need to read that? Do you have that?
Did you want any other?
I think. I think I'm going to have. Yes, it's not. Go ahead, Mike.
If I could, this being a recent addition, I did want to take the opportunity, give Greg Bengtson the opportunity to kind of walk you through the resolution, just so you and or listeners at home have a sense of what it's intended to do.
And excuse me, Mayor Hoppick here. Maybe I'm going to play city clerk here and maybe read what the title to the resolution is so the public knows, unless you have it in front of you.
We just had one person come through that wanted to address the commission.
Okay. You can do it.
Kelly Hopkins, you're unmuted. And
Hi, yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. First, I want to say I understand the difficulty in these decisions that you're having to make. That is not lost on me at all. I can imagine this is very difficult, but I just want to reiterate one more time. I am a social worker here in our community in Salina, and looking at your proposed staffing approach, I am really concerned about the line item for police department. We know with the shelter in place, with income loss, increase in substance abuse, we are and going to see an increase in domestic violence, child abuse, and recognizing when we're handicapping our law enforcement and our detectives, we are further victimizing victims of crime when they can't focus on everything they need to focus on. And so I just really want to implore you to rethink about that line item, at least for this first pass.
Okay, is that it? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't see anyone else at this point.
Okay, with that, we will move to 3.2.
So resolution number 20-7830, a resolution providing the city manager's approving the city manager's recommended emergency staffing plan for the remainder of the city of Salina's 2020 calendar budget year in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Hoppick. With that, I will turn it over to Greg Bengtson.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioners, Greg Bengtson, legal counsel. The recitals at the outset of the resolution largely mirror the much of what Mr. Scragg has reported on. The additional material we've referred to already, and that is in recital I, we articulate the code provisions relating to the city manager's role and responsibility in this type of situation. And in J, we refer to the governing body's role and responsibility in this type of situation. The actual resolution contains 7 sections that relate to the substance of the matter. The first refers to the emergency staffing plan, as we have referred to the plan that has been put before you this evening. And in the resolution, it simply speaks of the city manager having what is characterized as broad discretion required to implement the recommended plan as presented to the governing body for emergency staff adjustments for the remainder of the city's 2020 calendar budget year, consistently with the objective of addressing anticipated revenue shortfalls with the additional goal of minimizing financial harm to city employees during a period of predictably fluctuating circumstances. In Section 2, the city currently has employee classifications that relate to whether they are classified full-time, classified part-time, or regular part-time, and those, as you might imagine, are functions of the regular number of hours worked. The point in Section 2 is to make clear that as these adjustments are made during the period of the emergency staffing plan, any of those changes in hours will not affect an employee's existing status for purposes of that full-time or part-time classification. Section 3 simply makes the point, the personnel manual currently refers to a scenario where reductions in force or layoffs could potentially be necessary. Section 3 simply makes the point that that is not included in the plan as those terms are defined in or described in Article 24 of the Personnel Manual. Section 4 speaks to the component of the plan that involves the necessity of furloughing employees at the discretion of the city manager. The Personnel Manual does not currently address the furlough scenario, but under the unique circumstances of the current situation, for the reasons that have already been discussed, that is one of the available mechanisms by which the situation can be managed to. Section 4 does go into some detail about what that means in terms of, or for an employee who is in that furloughed status. It essentially involves a mandatory leave without pay. It does not require the exhaustion of leave balances. During the period of the furlough, the additional leave balances do not accrue. The leave balances are frozen until termination of the furlough, or if for some reason the employee would separate from employment. D, the furloughed employees will continue to qualify for the city's share of the city's group health insurance benefit, must make arrangements for payment of the employee's share of that health benefit, will be given as much advance notice of the furlough as circumstances allow, and is expected to qualify for the unemployment benefits that have been described earlier when in the furloughed status. Section 5 speaks of the shared work program and speaks of how that based on the cost savings to the city in reduced wages and the employee eligibility for traditional unemployment compensation and the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, while that remains in effect, the staffing plan does include utilization of the shared work employment compensation program. And as you've already heard this evening, that is administered by the Kansas Department of Labor. Section 5 authorizes the city manager to prepare and submit as many shared work plans or amended shared work plans for approval by the Secretary of Labor as may be necessary to implement the emergency staffing plan. And as you've heard Ms. Fisher refer to, that could be a number of plans, and those could have to be modified over the period of the time that this emergency staffing plan would be in effect. You've also heard described what Section 6 addresses, and that is the potential reduction in compensation of a department head. It does make the point of excluding an interim department head, but as that potential transition from the shared work program to that scenario where it is actually beneficial to transition to the 10% reduction in a department head's full-time compensation that will occur. Section 7 then speaks of implementation. It really is kind of a summary of the components of the plan and speaks to the ability of the city manager to implement the plan and to respond to financial changes related to COVID-19, then giving the city manager the authority to designate and or redesignate essential and non-essential employees, to modify the emergency work plan, to furlough individual employees for periods of time deemed necessary, to modify work schedules and assignments in order to implement the shared work program, and to modify the work schedules, working conditions, and or job assignments of individual employees. Section 8 then just speaks to the effective date. The resolution would be in effect from and after its adoption and remains in effect through December 31, 2020.
Thank you. This is not really a question. This is more of a comment, Mayor Hoppick here. I know seems like one of the main concerns Commissioner Hodges had and our call-in is dealing with the staffing at the police department, and I think under Section 1 it gives the city manager is granted broad discretion for dealing with personnel issues. So I feel like under this we're giving Mike the tools that he needs if we find that the original plan we have is not workable. I think if we could all agree that pretty much gives you the ability to address that, I'm comfortable with that. So.
And that's what I'm committed to. It's going to take coordination with Chief Nelson and his staff, but we'll do our best to implement this the best we can, and if circumstances don't allow for that, we'll have to adapt. We do have a caller that has flagged that they wish to speak. If you want.
Let's see if we have any other questions or comments from the commission first. Any others? Commissioner Franz, Ryan.
No. I'll wait until later. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Hodges.
Okay, go ahead.
Brian Krecklow, I've unmuted you. You've indicated you.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, this is actually Karen Krecklow.
Okay.
And I'm a little confused about how you think it's a privilege for your employees that are working to still be working when the people who are laid off are actually making more money. They're getting $600 more a week in wages, but you think the people that you are putting on the front lines and in trouble, for example, the trash people, the people who work out at the trash and let you in and you take your money and all of that they should be just thankful that they have a job, that they shouldn't deserve hazard pay. May I ask why that is? The cities can't afford it. If you can't afford it, then let them go and let them get the better income from unemployment. But to hold them and not willing to pay any kind of extra pay, hazard pay, is unconscionable. It's taking advantage. Is that what you want your city to say? I mean, think about it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to decide who wants to answer this.
This is Mike Craig. If anything I said came off as, in terms of them just being thankful for having a job, that certainly is not my intent. We recognize the disparity of this federal pandemic unemployment compensation, and I don't know how to resolve that. We've tried to make use of it to the benefit of our employees and our organization the best we can. So that's why we've tried to customize our furloughs and our work shares to kind of account for that added payment on the front end and break even on the back end. So my only intention.
They can make more money being off work than you're willing to give them and putting them in hazard.
Yeah.
I would think that you would applaud them for being willing to be there for our city and for do the job that they do, which puts them in jeopardy every single day, and applaud them and give them extra income, because you don't know if somebody else in their family has lost wages. You don't know in this difficult time. Right. But you're saying that their value isn't as valuable as the state or the government is saying your value is, even though you got laid off, we want to make sure that you're okay. What does that say about our city? It doesn't, to me, it doesn't say very much for who we are, and it doesn't recommend working for the city. And I think that is a complete shame. And honestly, gentlemen, I think you should all be ashamed by that. You're not thinking of the people that work for the city. You need to step out of your role that you are now and step into the role of an employee. And step into the role of, I have no choice. And what you put them through when they have no choice.
The question of hazard pay is something that can be taken up kind of separate and distinct from the federal program and that payment and this approach. That's we kind of had a little bit of that conversation, and the governing body could certainly discuss it further.
Yeah, and Mayor Hoppick here, and I hope that what we said didn't devalue what we think of our current employees. That was not my intention. I don't believe the intention of any of the other commissioners. We're trying to balance a budget, and hazard pay has been brought up. That's not part of this plan. That doesn't mean that won't be something that could be discussed at a later time. But and we understand that the $600 does make the unemployment a little different than it usually does, but that's kind of out of our control, I guess. So, does anybody else have any?
This is Commissioner Davis. When you look at our plan is to keep as many of our employees working with as full a paycheck for as long as possible. You know, we have some luxuries or some expectations because we're a big government with what everyone assumes are deep pockets. If we were a small private business, our doors would be shut. Those employees would be out on the street with whatever they could get on their own. So we're trying to have as many of these employees, still our employees, come December 31st. But I think this plan, you know, someone who's working could just as easily have been someone furloughed and vice versa. And someone who is furloughed may have to come into work for someone who gets sick. I mean, there are just so many uncertainties. We had to cast a wide enough net to help the most number of employees. And it's not easy. You know, this is something you would never have sat down on a Monday morning and said, oh, let me devise this for an employment compensation plan. But considering the times we're in, we're trying to help the most number of families for as long as we can. Because even at some point, even our money could run out. And then you have a lot of people with no job.
Any other comments? Karen, thank you for your call. And
I think
yes, you had one more comment?
I'm sorry. What I think is that, you know, you're cutting their hours and putting them on furlough. You need to think of the people who are still working and give them enough to make sure that they are working, getting their full-time wages, plus they should have an extra.
Commissioner David, you know, there are certain jobs that probably deserve hazard pay. You know, well, no, that wasn't the end.
I have to say.
That wasn't the end of
Thank
the
you.
that wasn't the end of the sentence. Whether we had COVID-19 or not. Right now, we're trying to obviously save some money, and we'd have to be very judicious if we're going to pick a spot to increase wages right now. I don't know if she's still there or not. But.
You're just saying that the employees aren't important, and that's very sad. I'm just very unhappy with the whole thing, and I'm sure that other people will be too when they hear this.
Well, I would suggest that you canvass around town, look at businesses our size or smaller, and see what percentage of their employees have jobs at all right now. And I think you'll see that the city of Salina is doing an exemplary job in trying to keep most of our employees whole.
I take issue with that statement because, again, it's the same statement I heard earlier that they should be lucky to have a job, and that's wrong.
Well, I'm not sure which news service you're getting information from, but if you look around the world right now, a lot of us, are very lucky to have jobs. There are a lot of people in this country who don't have jobs. They had great jobs a month ago, and they don't now.
So you're saying that they don't deserve anything. They're just lucky they should have their job. That's just so feeling from you. It's just showing your thoughts of your employees. And
Okay, all of us are one fever and one bad cough from not having a job ourselves. So, this is a very unusual time. And, the usual rules of engagement are going to have to be suspended in some cases. We're trying to do the best we can for the most number of people that we can.
And, Mayor Hoppick here, and I'm a little bit offended that we're talking about...
Sounds pretty mercenary.
Okay.
And that doesn't look good in these times.
Okay, I guess, can I talk? I think we've sat here and we've worked hard to do what we think is best for the majority of our employees. And if there's a few employees that I'm guessing you feel like we've I'm trying to think the word I'm looking for, but I mean, we have not said anywhere in here that we do not appreciate the work that the employees of the city of Salina are doing and have done in the past. I'm apologetic if you think we've been out of line, but I think we've worked hard to do what we think is best for the majority of the city staff. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
Commissioner Franz here, if I understand, the proposal is that we either need to pay them or let them go. And I think we have actually tried to keep as many employees as whole as possible for as long as possible with this kind of hybrid of what we're doing. And I agree, the $600 a week, the way it's structured, creates a difficult situation. But we can't change that, and I think we need to try to do what's best for as many of our employees as possible as we can. And that means, I think this plan does that.
Commissioner Davis, we do run the risk of losing an employee placed on furlough. That's I don't know how much of the presentation we're watching, but that is one of the downsides of furlough. You may lose a good employee to another employer, and the $600 a week benefit is not, forever. That has a very specific timeline, and I guess you can only hope that if folks are coming out ahead with that they do save some of it for leaner times ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have any other callers?
We have other callers on the line, but none have indicated, none of them have pressed *9 to indicate they wish to speak to you. Although we do have some new ones popping up. If anyone wishes, if any of the callers wish to address the City Commission, they need to press star 9. Okay, have another one. I've unmuted the phone number ending in 9002.
Yes.
Yes, please state your name and you have the floor.
Yes. My name is Leon Digis. I've got, I can't get a good explanation, and I think it's really ridiculous that our recycling center is not open during this time of closure. They've got the least contact with customers.
This is Mike Scragg. A couple of things. Plastic is one of the surfaces that the virus lives on the longest, is my understanding. So that, combined with the recyclable materials, including bottles that would have saliva, was a concern. And we've actually reassigned those individuals to help with sanitation duties because we don't want to have our sanitation workers riding 3 in a vehicle. So we've had to reassess staff to do what we're calling a shadow vehicle. As a route is completed or they have to run to the landfill, then an employee is following to pick up that third employee and carry him to a vehicle rather than 3. So we had safety concerns initially, and we also had staffing priorities.
Does that help answer your question?
Well, not really. I just don't think that's... Not really. I just can't think that their connection with that, they don't even come in contact with any of that stuff. It's...
Mayor Hoppick here, I think another concern is those individuals were leaving our community and going to another community that was potentially bringing them in contact with individuals from a different community that could put them at risk also.
What's going to happen, you're going to have all that stuff that's supposed to be going to the landfill, to the recycle center, is going to be ended up out in the landfill.
Well, Mayor Hoppick here, we realize that, and we're hoping we can get back to normal. I'm one of those individuals that uses that weekly myself, so I know where you're coming from, and so we hope to get that back up and running as soon as we can kind of get things back to some type of normalcy. So.
Well, I know I do an awful lot of recycling, and I had to go to the recycling, should have went several weeks ago, so I got to go to the landfill is all I got to do.
Okay.
This is Mike Scragg. Throughout the presentation, I repeatedly acknowledged that these financial challenges are forcing us to have significant reductions in service levels across the organization, and this is just one example.
Appreciate you recycling, appreciate your input, and hopefully we'll see you at the recycling center before too long.
There are additional callers. If any of them wish to address the commission, they need to press star 9.
Okay.
While we're waiting for callers, is there an opportunity for discussion or other items after this vote on this resolution, or
under other business?
Yeah,
I can bring it. We can have other business.
Okay.
So I have another one.
Okay.
Caller ending in 1185. You're unmuted.
Yes, are you there? Caller?
Sorry, you are echoing, so I'm having difficulty hearing.
Okay. We can hear you, so you're welcome to go ahead. If you'll state your name.
My name is Lacey Kearns.
Okay, go ahead, Lacey.
I guess my question is, I came in a little bit late, but my understanding is that you all have not checked to see how long it's going to take for the employees to get the unemployment benefits through the state, this extra $600 a week. Is that correct?
Well, what we know is our payroll May 1st will be a regular payroll from the city of Salina. The state has said that they're struggling with unemployment benefits and implementing the $600 payment. I've seen Senator Moran's office has engaged with the state to resolve any guidance questions that they raised, and the state had indicated last week that they plan to implement and be able to distribute the payments in the next week or two. So our understanding is we would have to submit the plan. Other employers have had theirs approved in 24 hours up to 3 days. Once we have the plan approved, we would then implement it with our staff. The state has said they would make retroactive payment, and they've said that they think they can have it up and running this week or next week.
So my understanding is some of this plan has already been implemented in some of the departments. So we're looking at possibly 2 or 3 weeks before they are to get the unemployment benefits. I guess my question is, why don't we flip-flop it? Because I noticed that one of the options was in July, if there was still shortfalls, that the executives and the department heads and all of those take a 10% pay cut. Why don't we flip it and have those department heads and those executives take the pay cut first before we start going towards that unemployment benefit? Because if anything, that's going to boost morale for the people that are still working.
This is Mike Scragg. We've communicated the intended plan, but it has not been implemented. We're under a stay-at-home order at the moment, so we've previously identified essential and non-essential employees and have employees staying home because of the stay-at-home order, but they are under the COVID paid leave that the city's providing and the emergency paid leave that's mandated by the Families First Act. So what we're trying to do, the July 25th date is when the $600 payments end, and so we're trying to move quickly to take advantage of those because they represent about $135,000 a week of possible benefit for our employees, and then also helping us close our financial gap. So we've tried to put this timeline together the best we can in light of when a full payroll will still be issued, when the City Commission can give us direction, when we can get the plan approved with the state of Kansas, and then recognizing that July 25th, this whole program of pandemic unemployment compensation ends.
Lacey, Mayor Hoppick here. I think you were asking about the $600 and that hasn't been paid out, but I may look at our HR supervisor that will be paid retroactive.
Natalie Fisher, that is correct. So I'll give an example of someone not working for the city of Salina who was unemployed as of 2 weeks ago. They haven't received their $600 payment yet, but when the systems are in place for the state to provide it, they will continue from, I believe it was around March 29th. From that week forward, the individuals, if they were unemployed during that time, they would be made whole or retroactively provided the $600 per week from that point forward.
Lacey, does that answer your question?
I mean, not really, because I heard the lady that kind of chewed you out, and to be honest with you, I kind of feel the same way. I am a state employee. I am an essential employee. So I'm not only fully aware of the stay-at-home order, I am also fully aware of the duties that I have to do. And although I understand that there is some concern about a money shortage, whether it's with the city or with the state, my agency isn't taking the drastic measures that you all are and acting, in my opinion, rather flippant when it's been some mismanagement, I think even from Commissioner Friends in the last few years, that caused a lot of these issues. But then you want to look at the employees to take care of the problem for you. And honestly, as a taxpayer, I would be willing to pay a little bit more in my own taxes to make sure that I had all of those folks at the police department out working and making sure that my neighborhood is safe, that I have all of the folks at the fire department out running on trucks in case my house catches on fire or my neighbor's house catches on fire. These are the folks that go out every single day, whether or not there is COVID, and they put their lives on the line every single day for every citizen in this city and folks coming into this city. And it just feels like to me that this has been a pretty harsh, pretty hateful way for you guys to say thanks for all your hard work.
Well, I'm sorry you feel like it's harsh. Again, I think we've tried to be as fair to the employees as we can, and we do have a limit as to where our budget lies. I mean, you may be in the majority, you may be in the minority about raising your taxes for some of that. So we're also trying to answer to the taxpayer that's on unemployment right now also. So this is not an easy decision for any of us, and but we're trying to take in all the information we have and do the best we can with what we think we have. So.
We've got additional callers calling in, so if they wish to address the commission, they need to press *9, and I'm going to unmute phone number ending in 2438.
Good afternoon. My name's Doc Laska, live in Salina, of course, and I only have one question. With the downsizing of city employees, I'm just wondering, why do we need 5 commissioners working when 3 at this point in time would suffice? You would still get a 2/3 majority vote on any issues that would come up. That's my only question. I think 3 could do the job of 5 right now at this point in time.
I think Commissioner Davis wants to answer that one.
Well, one, it would be budget neutral because we're not taking any payment for our services right now. Secondly, if you only have 3 commissioners, no 2 of those 3 can discuss any issue because that would be an open meeting violation. So, we have to have the ability to discuss these issues, not with all of each other, but with at least one other person, because it's hard to resolve all these issues in your mind sitting up here with the cameras running. And this is a time where a collective consciousness probably is quite advantageous to the city. So it wouldn't cost you any less or more money to have 3 sitting up here, but you get a whole lot more opinion and expertise with 5 of us.
Mike Scragg, is one clarification. We're not downsizing. We have employees in work share and in furlough, but we haven't said any employees are being let go. Have additional callers calling in. If you wish to address the commission, please press *9. Mr. Laska is back.
Sorry.
Oops, sorry. I had you muted. I just unmuted you. Go ahead.
Okay, I didn't get a chance to respond. Well, if I am correct, somebody mentioned that you're all sitting there on your own time for free and this and that. As last recollection, you're all salaried. So you get paid whether you're there or not. So that doesn't make really any sense to me. But anyway, thank you, gentlemen, and of course, Melissa. Have a nice evening.
Well,
we're not. Okay, go ahead.
Well, we're not sitting here free. I think, well, for those of us, and I won't speak for Commissioner Franz, I don't know his particular full situation. For the two gentlemen to the left of me, we are fully employed. It actually costs us money to serve on the commission because this is time that we can't work at our regular jobs. We do receive a token, I'll call it a stipend, which we have agreed to not accept as an act of an example until we get our ship righted again. Although you're not going to balance the budget off of what we're not what we're not getting, but it's out of a sense of duty and service to the community. Definitely not a way to balance our own incomes at home.
Any others?
Yes. Phone number ending in 0624. You are unmuted. 0624.
Hello.
Yep.
Yes. Your state your.
This is Jerry Boxa.
Hi, Jerry. Go ahead.
I'd like to take just a minute to thank the commission for all the hard work that they've been doing. I also want to express my absolute dismay at the citizens in Salina. It really appears to me that people who are employed with the city are complaining out of greed that they're not able to get an extra $600. I know you guys can't say that, but I can. That's disgusting. And the other thing is, regarding all the call-ins, my dad had a saying that may apply to some of this. You try to respond to everybody that calls in, and I understand that. But this is what my dad said. My dad used to say, it takes one idiot to argue, and it takes two idiots to make a conversation out of it. I think you need to thank people for their comments and click them off.
Is that our cue?
Thank you, Jerry. Maybe the best advice I've had in a long time.
We still have additional callers. If anyone wishes to address the City Commission, please press *9. Might give it just a little bit longer. There's some recent callers that are showing up on the screen, but I don't see them indicating they wish to speak. Okay, that's all I see.
Okay. Okay, with that, I will bring it back to the commission. Do we have a motion?
Yeah, Mayor Hoppick, I move that we approve resolution number 20-7830.
Commissioner Ryan, second.
Mayor Hoppick, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mayor Hoppick. I would like to make a motion to amend to include establishing a hazard pay plan for our frontline essential workers at risk.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have a second on that. Okay. So what we'll do is we will move, we have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7830. A resolution approving the city manager's recommended emergency staffing plan for the remainder of the City of Salina's 2020 calendar budget year in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, that passes 4-1. And other business, I believe, Commissioner.
Yeah, I think certainly the issue of hazard pay can be brought up, but not necessarily to tie this issue down. We've had some comments about Parks and Recs, Kenwood Cove, and I don't know how more simple you can make the statement 6 feet means 6 feet. I mean, you can't have a place like Kenwood Cove open and keep people 6 feet away. It just doesn't work. And I'm suspecting that most folks who want it open have not had a family member be very ill with COVID-19 or have a relative die from it. I mean, this is a bad disease. But that doesn't mean that people can't get exercise. I mean, this is a great time to spend time with your family. You can get cans of corn and sweet potatoes out your cabinet. You can do lifts. You can get online. You can get on TV. There's lots of exercise you can get. Our parks are still open. We're not having parks programming, but if you want to walk around Bill Burke or any other parks we have, they're still open to do that. As far as helping our police department out, it's a great time to go next door and meet your neighbor, say hi to them. It's amazing what self-policing in your own block will do to cut down crime. If you're going to be home, sit out on the front porch. It's very effective to have that little lady, everybody has one, that little lady down the street who sits and knows what everybody's doing. But she's also a great crime deterrent. Don't leave your keys in the car at night. Bring the bicycle in off the sidewalk. If something does happen, don't be afraid to give the police the name of that license, or description of the car that you saw leave there. There are a lot of things that we can do to help the police and reduce the number of calls that they will have. I think our department heads should feel that they will have an open line of communication with the city manager. I mean, if something is not working, the city manager represents a resource either for different ways of looking at staffing, looking at budgeting. I mean, sometimes it's just a tool that's used to make something work more effectively. And if we've set out in a direction that's not working, then, we should be smart enough to realize that and change it. But with the speed with which we've had changes just in, when to wear a mask, when to wear gloves. I mean, every week there's going to be something new, and we may have to come up with a different approach to how we manage our employees. It's a great time to learn how to streamline our processes. I'm becoming quite more effective in my office just out of necessity. Things I'd planned to do, well, now I have to do them. And so we should come out of this smarter and leaner, but most importantly, we have to make sure we come out of this, I mean, from a health perspective. And if we think we can cheat on this and shorten that time that we have to stay away from each other, we're going to be in for a very, very rude awakening. Well, in fact, it won't be an awakening, it'll be a very rude succumbing to this illness. So this is, not the time to get too anxious. It's you need even more patience now because it can get worse. We like to say things couldn't get worse than this, but they can. So rest assured, we are doing what we can, but we don't have much of a track record to build on from the past to know for sure what's definitely going to work and what's not going to work. But if you have great ideas, don't keep them to yourself. Send them in. Sometimes the best the five of us can do is be a conduit to get information into the city manager and to department heads. Because I should not delude myself into thinking that I can do the technical stuff that they're doing now better than they can. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, with that, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you guys and gals for all your hard work on this.